Prologue, From Chaos to Cosmos. Before our universe, there was another, much greater world. This world was one of peace and prosperity. It played host to men and women of boundless wisdom, power, and compassion. But this was not to last, for the time came when the immortal king Void sired 3 children, 3 brothers. Helix, the eldest, saw all and knew all. The winds of power were at his command. Life, death, light, darkness, time, and space. But even with all this power, he lusted for more. Chaos, the middle child and by far the wisest of the 3, held sway over only one of the 6 winds, the wind of space. This did not faze Chaos, for he did not crave power like his older brother. Rather, he respected it, using it only for the benefit of his father's people, not for the betterment of his own condition. In time, Chaos learned to harness the previously untamable power of the Pathweb. Using this newfound power and the power over the wind of space with which he was born, Chaos was able to make possible the impossible. He could create matter where none existed before. Finally, Ophion, the youngest, the serpent, the eater of worlds, was known throughout the universe as the Nightmare Child. His vast maw could devour anything in his path. He did not discriminate. Even light could not escape his pull. As such, Ophion was to be the first weapon, the harbinger of war, a foreigner in a world of peace. As it should be, Helix, the eldest, was the first to sire his own children. From his own essence he forged 2 perfect soldiers. Order, his son, was the first. Contrary to his name, he craved destruction, much the same as his father craved power. He would stand by Helix to his final breath. Helix's second child was to be named Malevolent. Even as a child, she was the most beautiful woman to ever set foot in the universe of old. Perceiving her as an enormously versatile tool, Helix kept Malevolent naive and spoiled. Once his children had grown into adults, Helix made use of his silver tongue to persuade his youngest brother into devouring their father Void. With Void dead, the universe fell into anarchy, and Helix, with his uniquely cunning mind, took advantage of this, raising himself high above all else as new king and savior of the universe. But it was not to be, for the people of the universe were peaceful, but they were not fools. For the first time in the history of the universe, the people took up arms. They marched upon Helix's palace in their masses, but the tyrannical king barely spared them a glance. Helix sent his son Order to slaughter them all, and without a shred of honor or dignity, Order undertook his creator's bidding. All but a handful of beings in the universe perished that day, and on the same day the innocent, sheltered girl Malevolent lost her naivety forevermore. This was the true beginning of the war. Chaos and Malevolent stood on one side, Helix, Order, and Ophion on the other. The war lasted for many millions of years, and all of creation was annihilated. Malevolent was the first casualty of the war, cast by her own father into the empty space at the edge of time, never to walk in the world as herself again. Next came Order and Ophion. Chaos tricked Order into flying into Ophion's maw, but the son of Helix was not as fatuous as he appeared. He realized the trick in its final moments and released all his power in a desperate effort to escape. All Order achieved was the reduction of both himself and Ophion to dust that scattered far and wide through the deep and empty space that pervaded the new world. It would be many billions of years before either immortal would find form again. Finally, in the last battle of the seemingly endless war, both Helix and Chaos poured all of their power into their final blows. This event would come to be known as the Big Bang. After so long, Chaos stood as sole heir to the universe, casting his own brother Helix deep into the recesses of the realm of darkness, the physical realm to offset the metaphysical wind of darkness. Out of the Great War arose new immortals. These immortals were to be known as primordials, as they were the first of the new universe. They were many as all the planets in all the galaxies. From the primordials came life. Most of this life existed in its basest form, single cells in the hottest places on the surfaces of worlds, single cells that would eventually grow to be so much more. On one planet, Earth, the primordials Nyx and Erebus, with powers over darkness, ruled, but they felt they were the best suited to rule over a bleak, black world, and they were right. The Earth prospered under the reign of its new caretakers, until finally, light pervaded and they saw fit to hand their rule to their own children, Aether and Hemera. New primordials would sway over light. Once more the Earth prospered, but this time, not all were pleased by the decision of the previous caretakers. Uranus of the primordials, though younger than both Nyx and Erebus, grew jealous of the even younger, less powerful immortals allowed to preside over the planet. Rumors of his displeasure over the decisions of Nyx and Erebus quickly reached the new rulers, who, contrary to the belief of the immortals they ruled over, were struggling with their reign, and were more than happy to hand over the throne to Uranus and his bride, Gaia, another primordial. Uranus was in fact a far better king than Aether or Erebus could ever have hoped to have been, and the earth exploded into a society bordering on the universe of old. But just as that world, it could not last. Uranus's queen, Gaia, jealously cast all her and Uranus's children into the depths of another world, Tartarus, and spread about rumors that it had been Uranus's own doing. Gaia persuaded her youngest son Cronus, an immortal who controlled time to some extent, to usurp Uranus's throne. With this action, Cronus became the new ruler of Earth, and he rescued all his immortal brothers and sisters and their children from Tartarus. However, he chose to leave the one-eyed Cyclops and the 100-handed Hecatoncheires behind, deeming them too impure to live alongside the new immortal regime, an action his siblings quietly noticed was far from his usual kind-hearted persona. As it transpired, one of the children rescued from Tartarus was Cronus's own child, the firstborn child of he and his wife and sister, Rhea. His name was Arathós, an immortal who molded time, light, and darkness by his will alone. After being lied to by a dying Uranus that one of his children would eventually come to usurp his throne, as he had Uranus's, Cronus decided, once again uncharacteristically of the immortal, that he would devour any other children who were born to he and Rhea, and that was exactly what he did, swallowing each child whole, first by the name Hestia, then Hades, Demeter, Poseidon, Hera, and finally Zeus. After the 6th child was devoured, a disillusioned Arathós decided he could not allow this to stand any longer. Presenting Cronus a mixture of mustard and ale, Arathós forced his father to disgorge his siblings, quickly whisking them away to the peak of an isolated mountain, Olympus. When Cronus discovered Arathos's betrayal, he declared war upon his children, ordering a recently evolved primate species called humans to fight for him. But they refused, rather taking up arms on the side of the younger immortals who they found to be more agreeable men and women by far. Even with the aid of mankind, the youthful children of Cronus were thrust into immense hardship in their crusade against the threat of their father, as Arathós, with his ever-present sense of right and wrong, commanded that no human soldier was to ever lose their life in battle. It was to be a war of immortals, not of men. 200 years passed, and Cronus and his kin felt assured of their victory. But Arathos's indomitable nature refused to recognize this end. The eldest child of Cronus had a plan waiting to be carried out since the beginning of the war, and it was finally the right time. Returning alone to the world of Tartarus, Arathós released the Cyclops and the Hecatoncheires, or hundred-handed ones as they were more often known. These 6 ancient beings crafted powerful weapons and armor for each and every member of Arathos's army, and revolutionary symbols of power for the 6 younger children of Cronus, and for the 3 children of Zeus, Artemis, Apollo, and Hermes. Arathos's own son choosing to be known only by his title, the Nightingale, and Arathós himself chose to craft their own weapons. Arathós produced a blade enchanted such that only one who truly knew the worth of the world might wield it. With their power, Arathós and his siblings and their 4 children stormed Mount Othrys, the home of their immortal predecessors, in a final great battle for the ages. Arathós took his enemies by surprise, crushing every defense that had been devised with one swift, decisive blow. Unable to close ranks in time, the armies of Othrys were cast aside with ease. Spurred on by their victory, the younger immortals continued their assault into the throne room upon the mountain, and in the panic that ensued, they captured all but the most powerful Othresians. Only Cronus, his brothers Iapetus, Hyperion, Cryos, and Cois, and Iapetus's son Atlas remained steadfast in the path of Cronus's descendants. Knowing the power of these immortals, Arathós ordered humanity to retreat, so all on the battlefield might fight without restraint. The battle between 11 powerful immortals under Arathós and 6 under Cronus appeared an assured victory. But Cronus had his kin reserving their energy for this day for many decades. The divine battle had been raging for 3 days when Demeter and Poseidon were incapacitated by Cronus. After another 2, the Olympians were able to capture Cois, a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Another day passed, and Hera and Hermes had been defeated. The battle continued for many long hours until only Arathós, the Nightingale, and Artemis stood against the 5 remaining Othresians. In the world below, it seemed as if nature itself were at war. Storms tore through the sky, wreaking death and destruction, before the moon burned away the clouds with beams of warm silver light. With only 3 immortals left standing against Cronus's 5, the battle now seemed hopeless, and upon hearing the news mankind despaired. But Arathós, Artemis, and the Nightingale refused to stand down. In a show of their devotion to the world and to humanity, the 3 immortals fought on, even in their comprehensively defeated states, and against all expectations they subdued Iapetus, Hyperion, and Cryos, leaving only Cronus and Atlas, the 2 most powerful of their kind, to defend their regime. Using their combined power over light, Arathós and Artemis constructed a prison from the sky that they laid as a great burden upon Atlas's back, forcing the immortal to his knees, lest the mass fall and crush him beneath. Cronus knew now that this fight was a lost cause. He discarded his scythe and raised his hands above his head in the universal sign of surrender. With this final gesture, the immortal war was finally over, and the world could see peace at last. Arathós was elected by adoration to be king of the immortals in this new age, though he refused to rule over mankind, for he claimed that he had no right. Under Arathos's rule, all immortals were equal, and with humanity following his example, the world became a more prosperous place than it had ever been before. As long as they swore never to cause discord within the world, Cronus and his kin were all set free to roam as they pleased. Under Arathos's rule, the immortal world became a democracy, and important decisions were made by a parliament of representatives, all elected by the people. As for humanity, they lived in peace and harmony, advancing their technologies beyond what had been imaginable when Cronus had seen fit to rule them. Mankind built cities that touched the sky. Arathós took Asriana, daughter of Tethys and Oceanus, the mother of his son, to be his queen on his elected council. The immortals of the world, time and time again, elected those who fought in the immortal war, and Asriana to make their decisions. The council governed over the natural world as well as the immortal world, to ensure that no freak disasters could ever bring harm to the humans and animals of Earth. For Arathós would not rule over humanity, but he did still care for them. The lights of the sun and moon were kept warm and welcoming by two divine beings each, Helios and Apollo for the sun, and Selene and Artemis for the moon. Helios and Selene having fought for Cronus during the war. Demeter used her powers over plant life to assure that mankind always had enough food to keep them alive, and when they did eventually die, Hades gave their souls sanctuary in another kingdom, dubbed by mankind as the afterlife. Under Arathos's rule, the world was fair and equal. There were no wars or conflicts, and the people of all races lived together in harmony. In short, this was the age of utopia. Or so the stories say. Chapter 1. Not a king, not a hero. Arathós strode into the circle of Olympian thrones, where the rest of the Olympian council waited. "Why do you call for a council, brother?" he wondered, seating himself in his simple white throne. "We're gathered here today for your sake, brother," Zeus replied coldly. "You and your preposterous notions of equality between us and the humans." "I am afraid that I don't quite follow you. Would you suggest that we are in some way superior to mankind?" Arathós wondered confusedly. "That is precisely what we would suggest," Poseidon spat. "Humanity should bow down and worship us, build temples in our honor. But you, brother, you insist that we lower ourselves to their insipid level, working the land and dirtying our hands in a manner that should be well beneath our honor." Arathós understood now what was to transpire that day. The immortal flashed meaningful glances to his sister Hera and to his son the Nightingale. "I have, on occasion, observed your disinclination to the more physical aspects of life, but I find that to be no reason for you to feel as you do towards all of humanity. In many ways, I see them to be our absolute superiors. They face the same troubles in life as we do, without so much as a wish for the enhancements that you frequent so fondly," Arathós reasoned, swallowing back a childish grin, although his wife proved unable to display the same control. In her throne beside Arathós, Asriana buried her face in her hands, hiding the otherwise obvious glint in her eyes. "Are you insinuating something, brother?" Demeter demanded angrily. "Oh no, dear sister. That is entirely your doing. It is not by my ruling that you have become so accustomed to realizing the stark reality in such situations as these," Arathós replied innocently, furtively moving his thumb from the arm of his throne, a signal to Hera and the Nightingale to do as they had planned so many decades prior. Immediately the two immortals sprang into action. The Nightingale took the arms of Apollo and Artemis, leaping over the edge of the plinth that played host to the Olympian Council, before any of the other council members were able to react. Hera did the same for Hestia and Asriana, escaping the dark moment to come. Hades quickly noticed the intentions of his two younger brothers, and with a nod of respect to Arathós, he turned and fled the throne room via the long mountain path. Hades did not trust his chances against the force of gravity. Do what you will, but always remember that you will lose. In time you may forget, and so will they, about many things. But mankind is not a race of old to submit. It may take 10 years or even 10,000, but one day they will rise up against you, and you will fall, Arathós predicted calmly, and Zeus roared with laughter. That is the most pitiful thing I have ever heard. We are gods. They are but mortals. You are a fool, brother, he boomed. We are not gods, Arathós stated clearly. We are not divine in any way. We use the same magic that humans do. In fact, if you cared enough to notice, you'd realize that there are forms of magic that mankind utilizes that we have never before seen or even imagined. There are no such things as gods, Zeus. You know that as well as I. That is enough. I will hear no more of this drivel, Zeus roared. No, let us humor the old man in his last moments. Allow him to make sense of his senile madness, Poseidon smirked. Yes, let him embarrass himself further, Hermes laughed, voicing his thoughts for the first time. You will fall, Arathós restated. It is in your nature, and in theirs. You will never change, never wither, never die. But humans will do all of these things. And in the end, that will be your downfall. You think that we'll lose because they can die? Zeus spat between fits of laughter. Yes, Arathós stated simply. Their short lives provide them with direction, something to strive for. They will adapt to anything that you cast their way, and whether or not they know it, they will develop over the ages, and they will find 1,000 new ways to kill and to destroy, if only to bring you down. With this act, you have condemned yourself. This may mark your inception, but it also ensures your final destination, and with it, the only victory I may ever come to regret. Upon finishing his speech, Arathós stood from his throne, arms by his side, and closed his eyes, preparing for what would surely follow, and he was not disappointed. Zeus's expression morphed into one of triumph as he thrust his weapon, a blade forged into the shape of a lightning bolt, into Arathos's heart, tearing it to pieces in more ways than one. Arathós awoke to the sound of music more beautiful than any he had ever listened to before. The immortal found himself lying on soft desert sand, the full moon shining brightly overhead. Arathós stood slowly, wincing as his joints cracked sharp and loud. The eldest son of Cronus turned to seek the source of the music he was enjoying, and discovered a white-cloaked man playing an instrument that he had never before seen. It comprised of a black wooden box and a long row of black and white strips that the cloaked man pressed to produce such magnificent tones. Near the instrument, in front of the cloaked man, an enormous funeral pyre burned, the body of an ancient dragon lying majestically at its peak. Beyond the pyre, Arathós could make out the forms of at least a dozen figures, almost human, only their skins ranged in color from sapphire blue to ruby red to emerald green. Arathós was not presumptuous enough to interrupt. This was a funeral, and even with his exclusively immortal experience, he was well aware of how horrendous an act it would be to interrupt their mourning. After another 5 or so minutes, the beautiful music came to its inevitable end. The fire that licked at the dead dragon's body transformed into a stunning silver display that reminded Arathós of the eyes of his niece, Artemis. Silver fire found its way into the small spaces between the dragon's scales and began to break it down from the inside. Moments later, the fire broke through the dragon's skin and thousands of tiny specks of stardust poured from within, floating up into the sky. Soon enough, the scales scattered too, floating up to join the rest of the once indomitable dragon. The silver specks would float high into the sky forevermore. Once the stardust had floated off into the abyss of the night sky, the funeral pyre broke down in the same way as the dragon. However, its dust simply dissipated into the cold night air. Arathós believed this to be the end of the ceremony until a strong golden light illuminated the desert in the east, the sun rising, showing its own respect for the old dragon. The light of the rising sun revealed a massive red rock piercing the desert floor from the core of the earth. More mourners stood atop the rock. All of a sudden, the mourners' forms began to change. Every figure, with the exception of the white-cloaked man, transformed into great dragons, just as noble as the deceased. The dragons raised their heads to the rising sun and breathed long streams of colorful flames that fused together, producing a single tongue of white-hot fire in tribute to their fallen kin. And they say that it is a blessing to live forever. Arathós heard the cloaked figure mutter as the dragons spread their wings to fly away. "Who are you?" Arathós called out warily when the cloaked man turned to walk his way. "I am a man who sends heroes on their way," he stated, not so much as raising his voice to cover the distance. "I meant your name," Arathós clarified. "I know. One day you will discover it, but today we have other matters to discuss." The cloaked man snapped his fingers, and suddenly both he and Arathós stood upon a beach where the sun had already fully risen, and only now did Arathós realize that it sat slightly to the north rather than to the south, where he was accustomed to it presiding. "Where are we?" Arathós worried. "They call it Lancelin, or at least they will. Time travel does rather complicate things, even after a few 100 billion years," the cloaked man answered. "Why am I here?" Arathós inquired. "Who did I say that I was?" came the reply after a moment of consideration. "You said that you're a man who sends heroes on their way. You never gave me a name." "You may call me Nightshade, if you wish. And yes, you are correct. I send heroes on their way." "That doesn't answer my question," Arathós accused. "I'm supposed to be dead, in a regenerative state at the very least, and yet here I am in this place you call Lancelin." "Tell me, Arathós, what marks a hero?" Nightshade continued, unabashed by Arathos's accusation of some ulterior motive. "I don't know. Is it that they help people?" Arathós wondered. "Almost, but no," Nightshade replied. "A hero is someone who fights, not for themselves, but for others. Others who they do not and will never know personally. A hero is one who hasn't lost faith in their world, who fights for what they believe to be right, and who isn't afraid to stand up to higher powers. That is why I have brought you here, Arathós, because you bear this mark." "What?" Arathós laughed in surprise. "I'm no hero. I was a king, for chaos's sake. How much further from a hero could someone be?" "You were not a king by choice, nor were you a king by birth. You were made a king because your people saw you for what you were, a hero," Nightshade chastised. "If I'm such a person as you say I am, then why did I not stand up to Zeus and the rest of my siblings when they usurped my throne?" Arathós demanded. and Nightshade smiled under his hood. Not that Arathós could see. Oh, but you did, don't you see? You refused to harm your family. You did what you believed to be right. Therein lies the mark of a true hero. Even if I am a hero, what am I supposed to do? I have nothing, not my sword, not a suit of armor. Nothing, Arathós said. Did I not introduce myself? Nightshade wondered, reaching into an empty space with both hands. A moment later, his right hand produced Arathos's sword, and in his left hand was a long black robe with silver linings and a purple glow beneath the hood. Nightshade proffered both items to Arathós, and the Immortal of Time took them both with shaking hands. My sword? How? He stammered. Only those who truly know the worth of the world may wield it. Those people are very few. Wield being the operative word. I have only held it, Nightshade reminded. Put on the robe. Okay, Arathós replied, knowing full well that whatever facade Nightshade portrayed, his sword couldn't be fooled by some small matter of semantics. Shrugging this off, Arathós did as he was asked and adorned the robe, which instantly started to expand around Arathos's body into a full suit of armor. The armor was pitch black and hugged Arathos's form perfectly. There were silver lines that followed the pattern of his veins, and on the otherwise blank faceplate were two glowing golden trapezium-shaped eyes, the exact same color as Arathos's own. What am I to do now? Arathós asked, his voice resonating slightly in the confined space of the armor. I don't even know where I am. As I see it, you have 4 choices, Nightshade claimed. Which are? Arathós questioned impatiently, ready to do whatever he could for the betterment of the world. 1, you could stay here, free from worry and beyond the Olympian Council's reach. The world would pretty much turn to dragon manure, but you would be fine. 2, you could go back to a family who almost certainly won't remember you and probably have a lot of fun explaining that. 3, you could travel throughout the world and help anyone in need. Not exactly fighting the big fight, but it would be something, Nightshade listed. And the 4th? Arathós prompted, hoping that Nightshade had saved the best for last. The 4th is that there are a few old friends who have fallen victim to Zeus's impressive paranoia. Liberate them from their prisons, and I'm sure that there will be something they know that you don't, Nightshade informed with a knowing smile. You wouldn't dare, Arathós growled. I'm afraid he would, Nightshade sighed. You'll be on your way then? I can't let this stand, Arathós agreed. I assumed as much. I suppose this is goodbye then? Maybe, Nightshade shrugged. What do you mean? Arathós wondered. You're not in Kansas anymore, Nightshade stated, somewhere between serious and joking. I'm not where? Not important, Nightshade supplied. Voidar, you know what to do. Who are you? Yes, sir, a voice within the armor cut Arathós off before he was transported away from Lancelin and into his new life in a brilliant purple flash. Chapter 2. Salvation. Could you try to be a little less gentle? Arathós groaned sarcastically as he climbed unsteadily to his feet. Sorry, sir, I am quite out of practice, Voidar apologized, and Arathós jumped in shock. Who are you? Show yourself, he demanded. You are wearing me, sir, Voidar sighed in exasperation. What do you mean I'm wearing you? Who are you? Arathós asked again. Typical werewolf, gave me to an idiot, Voidar muttered. My name is Voidar. I am a free-floating consciousness who happens to have complete control over this suit and all its abilities. Any questions? He explained slowly and impatiently. What do you mean by complete control over this suit? Arathós wondered, and Voidar sighed again. You do know what complete means, don't you? You do know what politeness is, don't you? Arathós rebutted angrily. It is the only socially acceptable form of hypocrisy, Voidar stated definitively. Just shut up and tell me where we are, Arathós growled. You really should choose your words more carefully, sir, Voidar chastised. I cannot be silent and give you information simultaneously. Just tell me where we are, Arathós roared into the suit, but it didn't quite have the desired effect, instead echoing around the suit and forcing Arathós to bring his hands to his ears. You really are extraordinarily good at controlling your emotions, sir, Voidar commented. Please, could you tell me where we are? Arathós asked through gritted teeth. Certainly, sir. We are in a place that will be called the 44s, at coordinates 43 degrees, 58 minutes and 4 seconds south, 175 degrees and 45 minutes west. The closest accessible point of land to your mother Rhea's island, which is at the coordinates 40 degrees, 5 minutes and 8 seconds south, 150 degrees, 32 minutes and 29 seconds west. The exact antipodes of Mount Olympus in Greece, Voidar recited easily. The exact what? Arathós wondered. The exact antipodes, sir. It is the point on the opposite side of the earth one would reach if they were to dig directly downwards, Voidar explained. Isn't the earth flat? Arathós asked. You have power over light and darkness, and you believe that the earth is flat. You truly are a genius, sir, Voidar deadpanned. Shut up, Arathós blushed. Anyway, what matters are these coordinate things. If I'm correct in assuming how they work, then Rhea's island is that way. Yep, he inferred, pointing in a seemingly random direction. I may have judged you too quickly, sir, Voidar admitted. You still need to work out a way to get there, however. You mentioned abilities? Arathós noted. You are indeed far more intelligent than I first gave you credit for, sir. Arathós crashed into the ground for the 10th time that day. Why are you doing this to me? He groaned, picking himself up again. Perhaps we should focus on your own powers, Voidar suggested. You are a culverter of time, correct? A culverter? Culverters are one of the 6, arguably 7, types of magic user. A culverter channels the chaotic energy of the path into distinct and precise forms of power through the mimicking of energies bound to them by pre-existing connections in the web, Voidar rattled off, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And the path and the web are what, exactly? Arathos's brow furrowed. Voidar made a noise akin to a dying bird. The path and the web are the constituent parts of the path web. The path is all of the energy that flows freely in the path web, an infinite amount. It exists in a primal and chaotic state, and is the energy that all things share. The web, on the other hand, is a composition of tight and direct veins within the path web. They are responsible for all the connections that exist between bodies in the physical and metaphysical realms, including all the laws of nature. Now, I would appreciate it if you stopped asking questions that make me sound like a textbook, sir. What's a textbook? That doesn't matter. I asked you a question a few moments ago. You are a culverter of time, correct? Yes, I suppose so, Arathós replied uncertainly. Wonderful. What do you imagine would happen if, while jumping, you increased the passage of time for the air particles above your body and reduced it for the particles beneath? Voidar wondered. Arathós knew better than to ask what an air particle was. You mean like this? He wondered. I wouldn't suggest... Voidar was cut off by Arathos's scream when he flew almost 100 meters into the air. Voidar reacted quickly, pulling himself away from Arathós and catching the culvertor mid-fall. "Try putting less force behind your jump, sir," he sighed, something he was making quite a habit of recently. Soon, Arathós was jumping 10 meters into the air, although his landings were still quite painful. "Nightshade wouldn't approve of me telling you this, but the force that pulls you back down to the ground is called gravity. Gravity is a force controlled by the wind of time and the wind of space. If you could tap into that power, from the wind of time at the very least, then you could slow your fall exponentially," Voidar theorized. "Couldn't I just slow the air particles below me to slow my fall?" Arathós questioned. "Unfortunately, gravity isn't that simple. Since you're already being forced back down to Earth, the particles below you will offer little to no resistance unless you had a much greater surface area to capture them. No matter how much you slow down time for those particles, they'll simply accelerate, and you'll only exhaust your powers. There is another particle you could manipulate, however," Voidar explained. "What particle?" Arathós implored. "It's called the chronion, or the time boson. It's an immensely elusive particle. No particle collider on any world has ever managed to detect it. But there's no doubt that it does exist. Although," Voidar trailed off. "Although what?" Arathós wondered. "If you were able to look into the wind of time, you might be able to see all of the time bosons, given that you are a culvertor of time itself, and as such, be able to control them." "How would I look into the wind of time?" "You couldn't. It's completely impossible," Voidar lied. "So why did you even bother telling me about it?" "You asked," Voidar defended. "In any case, we have been working for almost half the day. I imagine you desire a break." "Wait a second. That's brilliant," Arathós exclaimed. "What is brilliant?" Voidar inquired. "Day," Arathós grinned. "Day is brilliant. I can control light as well as time. There must be some kind of light particle, since we can see light." "That is inspired, sir," Voidar agreed. "But do you believe that it would work?" "It's worth a try." Arathós rose unsteadily into the air on 2 small platforms of light, but to no avail as he quickly lost his balance and fell back to the ground once again. "Well, that was pointless," Arathós huffed, annoyed at himself for his failure. "Surrounding your entire body with light may be a more logical course of action, sir," Voidar sighed. "Oh, yes, right," Arathós blushed. The immortal concentrated for a moment, and his entire body was wreathed in bright white light. "Of course, one would never wish to be stealthy," Voidar stated sarcastically. "I'll think about that later. For now, I have a mother to save. We've spent enough time here already." "Valid point," Voidar conceded, before he flew over to Arathós and morphed back into a hollow suit of armor. Arathós angled himself towards Rhea's island and used his power over the light around him to propel himself forward with a loud sonic boom. Arathós crashed into the beach of Rhea's island with a loud bang, forming a small crater. "Very subtle," Voidar commented dryly. "Shush," Arathós hissed. "I thought we had got over. I mean it, shush! Someone's coming." Voidar immediately fell silent as a wind spirit peered over the edge of the crater. "Who are you?" it demanded. Arathós thought for a moment, knowing he couldn't use his real name, since this wind spirit would obviously report back to Zeus. However unlikely it was Zeus would even remember his name, considering his son the Nightingale's power over the mind. "I am Salvation," he decided, speaking in an unrecognizably deep voice. "I am the light in the darkness." "I asked for a name, not a title," the wind spirit growled warningly. "Leave this place now," Arathós ordered. "And if I don't?" "You will." Arathós wreathed himself in light once more and rose slowly out of the crater. The wind spirit backed up slightly in fear, but soon steeled its nerves, drawing a 3-foot-long sword out of thin air. I'll give you one chance to surrender," the spirit stammered unconvincingly. Remember how you jumped, Voidar whispered to Arathós. He's a wind spirit. He'll survive. I surrender to no one, Arathós stated, drawing his sword from a sheath on his back. It was one of a kind, a 4-foot-long weapon forged out of his own immortal essence, and blessed with the powers of time, light, and darkness. The blade was presently pitch black and surrounded by a fine black mist that sucked in any light nearby, though it could also appear bright white and brilliant gold if Arathós so desired. Arathós pointed his sword at the wind spirit and used it to channel a focused blast of power, enough to sweep the spirit off its feet and throw it far out into the deep blue ocean. There is a field of magic protecting this island, completely impenetrable. It seems the wind spirit was simply a lookout more than anything, Voidar reported. Impenetrable? Arathós snorted. It's obviously never met me then. The Culverter of Time walked forwards until he felt the barrier with his hand. He thrust his sword directly into it, and he was immediately cast backwards by a powerful force. It seems that the barrier has, in fact, met you, Voidar noted dryly. It's met my sword, not me, Arathós corrected. Walking back up to the barrier, he thrust his sword into the ground and leaned down on one knee, releasing his power over time. The winds picked up as time around the edge of the island was reversed. The crater Arathós had made was filled in again, but he still had some way to go. Arathós willed time to reverse faster, tightening his hold on his sword so that he wouldn't be buffeted away by the strong winds. Soon enough, the barrier glowed with the golden energy of time, and it dispersed into non-existence. Now, the barrier has met me, Arathós breathed before he promptly keeled over backwards, utterly exhausted. My lord, your mother Rhea's prison has been breached, the messenger of Olympus, Hermes, reported, storming into the throne room. What? Zeus roared. How is this possible? I will have the perpetrator executed immediately. Hermes visibly gulped before he wet his lips. My lord, the wind spirit overseeing the island said that the attacker gave no name. He simply called himself Salvation. Salvation, Zeus scoffed. This traitor will soon know the error of his ways. Send every available unit to track down this man at once. Either he will become an asset to us, or he will die. At once, my lord, Hermes bowed. Zeus raised his bolt-shaped blade to the sky and discharged a great bolt of lightning, calling a meeting of the new Olympian Council, of himself, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Artemis, Apollo, Hermes, Hestia, his own younger children, Athena, Hephaestus, and Ares, and an older immortal discovered by the council not too long before, Aphrodite. As soon as the entire council had assembled from their permanent residences upon Olympus, Zeus began the meeting. I have gathered us here today to speak of a new threat to Olympus. A man has broken into Rhea's prison. He called himself Salvation. Does that mean anything to anyone here? Upon the word salvation, the hearth in the center of the throne room suddenly flickered to life for the first time in nearly 100 years. In her throne next to Zeus, Hera smiled joyfully, a tear streaking down her cheek. Hope had finally returned to Olympus. Chapter 3. Rhea. Arathos's eyes slowly fluttered open to the sight of caring blue eyes. Mother? He asked hopefully, and Rhea smiled. Do not speak, my child. You have already expended too much of your energy ridding my island of its barrier, she chided. I am over 3,000 years old, Mother, Arathós complained. A child, like I said. Rhea's smile turned mischievous as she straightened the many layers of sheets that Arathós only just noticed were draped over him. You still don't need to take care of me, Arathós argued, starting to rise, only to be pushed softly back down. I wasn't connected to the domain of motherhood for nothing. You need to rest whether you like it or not, Rhea reasoned, hoping that Arathós hadn't picked up on her slight slip. What do you mean, was? Arathós inquired, trying his best to hide his rising anger. Always so selfless, Rhea mused. I no longer hold sway over my domains, but you must not be angry. While the Olympians may have stripped me of my domains, they could only gift them to my chosen heir, your youngest sister. With this reassurance, Arathós found it much easier to relax once again. Hera will take good care of your domains, he sighed. Of course, Rhea replied. Now go back to sleep. You'll be of no help to the rest of our family if you're too exhausted to lift your sword, let alone make use of your powers. Arathós reluctantly obeyed his mother's order and shut his eyes once again, only vaguely recognizing that he no longer wore his new armor. Arathós appeared in a field of wild grass. Wheat, he recognized, a mortal crop. Arathós remembered some of the human children running through their fields and being chased off by farmers who were none too happy about the children ruining their crops. The sky wasn't blue above the field. The sky was blood red with shining gold clouds. It was a wondrous place, but no matter how hard he tried, Arathós couldn't place where he was. We're in the Ager Somniorum, the land of dreams. This was the only place I could meet with you, and only because Tartarus owes me a favor. A very familiar voice, old and kind and gravelly, spoke to Arathos's right. Arathós turned, startled, to see the wrinkled face of his father, Cronus, a white beard and bald head complemented by golden eyes, just like Arathos's own. Father, Arathós breathed, you look so old. Cronus smiled amusedly, his eyes twinkling. I am old, he told his son. I'm immortal too, so I should look young, yes, just like you. I used to have the same hair as you know. Cronus ran his hand through Arathos's light brown hair. Not anymore. I'm dying. But that's not important. No, well, I suppose it is important, but similarly it isn't. What is important is that I teach you what I should have many centuries ago. Back before that thing got to me. You're dying? I am. But don't you bother worrying about that, boy. I am much too far away for you to do anything about it. Tartarus, like I said. You liked it, didn't you? When you were a little boy. You always were a strange one. Tartarus was nice. Everything was red and on fire, but it was nice. Arathós smiled, a smile that quickly faded. You can't expect me not to worry about you dying. How can you die anyway? You're immortal. I may not have taught you about your powers, but I'm sure I taught you some things. Immortals cannot die in normal circumstances, that's true. But we can fade. A blow that our regenerative states can't heal. Exposure to some of the less agreeable winds of power. Many others that I don't care to list. Manifestation of the wind of death found me. I was weak. It turned me against you and your brothers and sisters. It cut me down to my core. Its power, that's what's still inside me anyway, is killing me. Slowly, but not really painfully, which did come as quite the surprise. Then find a manifestation of the wind of life. Cancel out the power. Arathós scrambled for a solution. No, Arathós. There's not one here, and even if there were, I'm at peace with myself. I'm happy to let myself die here. Please don't take that away from me. I won't. Thank you, son. Cronus smiled. You said we were in some place called the Land of Dreams, yeah? I don't think I've ever dreamed this place, so is that some kind of symbolic name, or? Arathós left his question hanging. The Ego Somniorum, yes. This is my dream, not yours. Yours is that way, I believe. Cronus pointed to his left. Like I said, Tartarus owed me a favor. He pulled you into my dreams, so I might teach you what I should have long ago. Okay. So, what do you want to teach me? Arathós accepted his father's explanation. I'd like to teach you a great many things. Come, walk with me. All this standing has my old legs restless. Arathós jolted suddenly from his sleep to find a now startled Rhea and a passive-as-ever Voidar with a bucket of water in his hands standing next to his bed. Arathós could see a golden haze. Cronus would be proud. He couldn't think on this, however, for Voidar threw his bucket of water over Arathos's head. What was that for? The immortal cried indignantly. Voidar shrugged. It seemed the more logical option, he stated. As opposed to what? Arathós demanded. Throwing it back into the ocean. This way I do less work and there's less of a chance of you going back to sleep, Voidar reasoned. It doesn't matter right now, Rhea interjected. As much as I hate to let you go, it's time for you to leave. Of course, sir. Arathós started before he realized what Rhea had said. Wait, what? I came here to save you, Mother. I can't just leave you behind. You must. I'm sorry, but there is no other way. Zeus's warriors will arrive any day now, and you can't be here when they do, Rhea stated sorrowfully. Then where am I to go? Arathós wondered resignedly. You must head to Delos. There you will find Leto, mother of the twin archers. She will know what you must do next, Voidar answered, revealing a new piece of information that Arathós immediately picked up on. You're not coming with me? He worried. What about the armor? I cannot travel further with you. There are other matters alongside Nightshade that require my attention more than you do, Voidar explained. As for armor, it seems that some people just can't keep away from one another, Rhea finished as another familiar face walked through the door. Hello, brother, she smiled warmly, and Arathós leaped out of his bed to embrace her in a warm hug. Hestia, it's been too long, he exclaimed joyfully. Yes, Arathós, it has. Though, it would be better if I could breathe, Hestia wheezed pointedly, and Arathós immediately jumped back. Sorry. Old habits, the former king of Olympus rubbed the back of his neck sheepishly. Don't worry, I should have expected it. Hestia laughed at her older brother's antics. Anyway, I can't be here for very long. I'm overstretching my limits as it is. How so? Arathós asked confusedly. I see no reason why you can't be here. You do see. You do not observe, Voidar sighed exasperatedly. What do you mean? Arathós inquired. I would suggest that you look out of the window. Properly, Voidar replied. Through the window, 3 warriors dressed in Olympian armor could be seen hurtling towards the island at a breakneck pace. Arathós did note, though, that the golden haze clouded his vision slightly. Oh. Now you understand our predicament. 1 powerful immortal could leave this island without being noticed, but 2? You would be insane to try, Rhea speculated. And since Voidar can't come with you, I brought this, Hestia concluded, throwing down a bag that Arathós hadn't seen before. It was a simple Hessian bag, but the golden haze that Arathós could now see gathered around it quite noticeably. Arathós reached out to take the bag, and he recoiled almost instantly, seeing the golden haze gathered around his hand more than it was around anything else. "What is this madness?" Arathós muttered. "What madness? What's wrong?" Rhea worried, seeing Arathos's terrified eyes. "Father, he came to me in my dreams, and he taught me to see time as this golden haze," Arathós tried to explain. It's all through the air, but it concentrates on that bag and on my hand." "Impossible," Voidar breathed. "I must leave at once." The suit of armor turned to walk out the door. "Wait, what is it? What's so important about the haze?" Arathós implored desperately, and Voidar hesitated for a moment. "It is something that you are not yet ready for, that your father should not have been ready for, nor shall anyone ever be ready for it," he responded definitively. "Now I must leave." Voidar quickly walked out the door of Rhea's home and launched himself into the air, heading back in the direction of the 44s. "I knew, and no one believed. Soon you'll see more. You'll see why it's so important." Cronus's voice echoed through Arathos's mind. Ignoring the golden haze, Arathós grabbed the Hessian bag from the floor, slinging it over his shoulder. "I know what must be done," he declared. "Thank you, Mother. Sister. This has been a time well spent, but I must leave too, as you say." Arathós stepped out of the door, shrouding himself in light, and propelled himself into the air, away from one prisoner's island, and directly towards another. "You must reunite them. You know that." Rhea turned to Hestia once Arathós was out of sight of the island and the Olympian soldiers. "Why is it so important?" Hestia wondered. "Because he's losing himself. He's never been so careless before. You can see that just as I can. He needs a reason to live, and this isn't enough. If he doesn't go back to what he once was, then this world may well have seen its final hours." "He will, Mother. He must," Hestia assured before she disappeared in a bright pillar of fire. "Not without her," Rhea muttered under her breath. "Not without her." Chapter 4. Leto. Arathós landed on the beach of Delos, armored from his neck to the ground. The Culvertor of Time dumped the Hessian bag beside him, continuing up the beach and into the nearby forest. The forest was dense and lush. The trees stood up to 40 meters high, with vines dangling down to the dark brown soil that was layered with brown leaves and roots that looked like dormant snakes. Birds and insects could be heard chirping, their calls echoing off the thick bark of the trees. Further into the forest, the sweet smell of juicy fruit permeated the air. Having visited this place many times to raise his niece and nephew, Artemis and Apollo, Arathós knew to follow the sweet smell, but very soon the sweet aroma turned into a miasma, and Arathós felt a small amount of bile burn in his throat. Against his better judgment, Arathós continued to follow the smell, under the assumption that this was simply a defense put in place by Zeus to keep away unwanted visitors. Arathós kept walking until he found the source of the rancid smell, expecting to find Leto tending to her garden as she usually did. But that was not what he found. Instead, Arathós was greeted by the sight of a deep, dark hole in the ground that was being guarded by a gigantic dark green python, 45 meters long and almost 2 meters wide. Inside the python's slightly ajar maw were rows upon rows of pointy yellow fangs. Arathós audibly gulped, and the python's eyes snapped open. 2 large blood-red orbs that simply stared at Arathós as if daring him to go any further. Ah, I see. Arathós gulped again. I must have taken a wrong turn. I think I'll be going now. He nodded, quickly turning away from the giant snake, only to find himself facing a massive green tail. Fast. Very fast, Arathós noted quietly to himself. He considered running, but the snake would almost certainly have been faster. Arathós recognized the part of the forest he was in, and it was surely the only place the smell of fruit might have drifted from. Arathós knew he stood near Leto's garden. It was the only place in the forest where fruit grew, but it was missing. Arathós turned back to the hole and noted a single apple balanced on its edge. "Why are you here?" the immortal wondered, carefully beginning to approach the dark green beast. "Are you here to keep me out? Or to keep her in?" Arathos's eyes flicked back to the apple on the edge of the hole, trying to formulate a plan to reach Leto without being devoured. Unfortunately, the snake realized where Arathós was looking and swiftly moved itself so that it was just barely fully encircling the hole in a 1.5-meter high wall of flesh and scales. "To keep me out, then," Arathós nodded thoughtfully. "So what would happen if I did this?" The eldest son of Cronus proceeded to lay his hand on the great snake's side. The snake's muscles immediately tensed and it narrowed its angry red eyes at Arathós. The snake's belly began to glow orange. Arathós backed away slowly, but the damage was already done. The snake slowly levered open its jaw, releasing a torrent of blinding flames. Arathós reacted immediately, rolling under the tongue of fire, but the snake wasn't quite finished. It slithered forwards and snapped at the immortal, who had only just enough time to draw his blade. Arathós swung his sword high, holding the head of the enormous beast in place with the flat edge of his weapon. The snake's belly began to glow once again. Arathós cursed under his breath, turning and leaping to the side. The snake plunged into one of the forest trees, not having expected Arathós to jump away so quickly. The python was dazed by its sharp collision with the hard wood of the tree, and Arathós refused to waste such an opportune moment. The son of Cronus lunged forwards and down into the deep, dark hole towards Leto's garden. In his adrenaline-fueled state, it took Arathós a moment to think to wreath himself in light. He had to slow the fall. He had no clue how far down Leto's garden might have been. There was a loud splash and a long hiss when Arathós collided with the water at the edge of the sinkhole that had swallowed Leto's garden. A great cloud of water vapor spilled into the cavern from the now heated pool. "A little further of a drop than I anticipated," Arathós muttered. "As it would seem," a voice replied from the shore. "It would be much appreciated if you would refrain from incinerating my garden in the future," Leto growled. "You should really be thanking the puddle. Without it, we might all be on fire," Arathós retorted, wading out of the water and onto the soil of Leto's garden. "Arathós," the sole resident of the garden gasped. "We were told that you faded, that Zeus destroyed you with his bolt." "I am far too stubborn for death," Arathós scoffed. "Never mind that, though. I need your help." "What sort of help?" Leto worried. "I need to know where all of the others are being imprisoned," Arathós told her. Leto bit her bottom lip hesitantly before she replied. "I can't tell you that." Arathós opened his mouth to retort, but Leto cut him off. "It's not because I don't wish to see my family free again, but rather because I fear for what you might do when you gain enough allies." I only wish to free those Zeus has wronged. Nothing more, Arathós defended, and Leto sighed. Therein lies my issue, Arathós. Even in your old age, you've yet to lose your innocence. If you continue on this journey, it will end in war. A war nothing like that between you and your father. Cronus was being controlled. In his heart, he never wanted to hurt his own children, and he managed to hold himself back. Your father still loved you and your siblings. But Zeus has no love for you. I know what you had your son do. Zeus doesn't even know who you are anymore, but that doesn't mean he won't notice you. Zeus, Poseidon, and Demeter want war, and they want power. Those are the only things they have ever truly wanted. Zeus will seek out war with you, and you will be forced to fight back. It may take 10 years or even 1,000, but one day you'll have to rise up against your family, and they will have to fall. Those are my words. I told almost exactly that to Zeus, Arathós realized, and Leto smiled sadly. And they ring true, just as every other word you've spoken has. You'll find the rest of us eventually, I'm sure. But please delay the inevitable as long as you can. When you release my brothers and sisters, don't let them see you. Be one with the shadows. Let them believe whatever they want to believe about their freedom. Just as long as they don't believe in you. When war comes, and it will, you won't be able to hide behind your childish facade any longer. When the war comes, there will be no victors, just as there are none in wars amongst mortal men. You have seen the monsters that walk through Tartarus, and yet you still refuse to believe that any person could be entirely without morals or mercy. That is your greatest quality, Arathós, but also your most deadly of misunderstandings. You must change, Arathós. Change, but never change. Please. Moments after Leto's painful speech, a great green mass dropped into the water beside Leto's garden, hissing in pain from the heat after Arathos's own fall. The snake's head resurfaced and the orange glow of deadly fire returned to its belly. There would be no time for Arathós to roll out of the way, no time to pull Leto with him. I did not teach you for you to die again, boy. Use your power. Use it. Arathós had no other choice. The culvertor took hold of Leto's hand in his own and focused on the golden haze around him. Arathós pulled the haze closer, his veins popping with the effort it took to bend time to such an extent. Hestia could travel through the flames of the hearth. Hades could bridge continents through the hellfire of the land of the dead. Arathós knew he could step into the swirling vortex of time. The golden haze, the wind of time, flowed into Arathos's skin and flooded his veins. The immortals' eyes glowed a brighter gold than they ever had before, and just as the great green snake's fire threatened to turn he and Leto to ash, they disappeared in a bright flash of golden light. Arathós and Leto appeared on the summit of Mount Othrys in Greece, almost directly south of Olympus. Arathós looked out across the land and realized something strange about the direction of the currents of the wind of time. I told you that you would see. Arathós could only feel his father's smug grin. There are so many, and not one is any brighter than any other. They all shine the same, and yet they're so different, each and every one. Cronus was right. Arathós was looking down to a mortal city, and he could see every man, woman, and child, every pet, every plant, everything that lived, and the currents of the winds of time converged on each one of them, marking each as important as the next. Arathós thought it was fitting. He always insisted that all humans and all immortals were equal, and when he looked at Leto and himself, and then down to the mortal city, it seemed the wind of time agreed. Chapter 5. The Honor in War. A black-cloaked man strode into the cave where the most cunning of all the brothers of Cronus was said to be held. Kois, an immortal with powers over intellect, resided deep within the cave, behind a series of puzzles and traps designed by Athena herself. The cloaked man ventured further into the cave until he found his path impeded by a great stone door with 5 great rings cut into the rock. Along the rings small images were carved, the same on each ring. Noticeably, the carvings of 5 small opened doors were aligned perfectly at the highest point of each ring. The man stood facing the wall for a moment before he shrugged, turning around to exit the cave, only to find his way blocked by one of the most beautiful women he had ever laid eyes on. Aphrodite, the cloaked man recalled. Here to undertake my execution, I presume? Aphrodite smiled lecherously as she walked towards the cloaked man, reaching out to place a hand on his chest. Not very astute for a man who's managed to cause Olympus so much trouble for nearly a century, she noted, a second hand slowly making its way around the cloaked man's waist. Recruitment, then. I did wonder. The man trailed off as Aphrodite pushed her body against his, wrapping both arms around him. What did you wonder? Aphrodite smiled innocently, their hands slowly making their way up the man's body. I wondered why the Olympians would send such a beautiful and gentle woman to deal with one such as me. The cloaked man let his arms slide under Aphrodite's. We have uses for you. Aphrodite's hands reached the man's hood. You have uses for a man of war in this time of peace? The cloaked man wondered, gently pulling Aphrodite closer than she already was. Oh, so many uses. The immortals around this little blue world won't know what hit them, Aphrodite boasted, beginning to pull down the man's hood, but she never managed to bring it down, for something hit her hard upon the side of her head. The tales of your fatuity were not exaggerated, culverter of beauty, Arathós muttered, pulling long, thin chains from beneath his cloak. Aphrodite tried and failed to break the chains that bound her to a short metal pillar in the center of a great wooden hall. The hall was made of all different colors of old, splintering wood, thrown together on short notice, Aphrodite presumed. Resistance is futile. Your chains were taken from the private collection of a wielder of powerful magic, a deep masculine voice stated definitively from behind her. Who are you? What do you want with me? Aphrodite worried. She could almost feel the satisfaction rolling off whomever stood behind her in waves. Who we are is not important, a woman's voice replied. What we want is information. Free me from these bonds first, Aphrodite tried to bargain, but her captors only laughed at her pitiful efforts. You are in no position to offer an ultimatum, Olympian. You will answer any questions we have for you, and then, and only then, you will be freed. Do we have an accord? It was the man again. Fine, Aphrodite hissed. Ask me your questions and be done with whatever other uses you have of me. Arathós was appalled. Throughout his interrogation of Aphrodite, the Olympian had completely expected to be used by himself and the other immortal he was working with. Leto's words had at last rung true. Arathós could no longer uphold his childish facade. The war had begun, and it was only a matter of time before the battle would be waged. The second immortal war. There would be death, and there would be incredible destruction. This might have been the beginning of the greatest war humanity would ever see. If war were to erupt, the forces of nature would be pitted against one another. All that would be left for many would be to pick a side. Arathós, as per Leto's request, would do anything to delay such a war, but he knew it was foolish to believe that he could delay it forever. If a war occurred, it wouldn't only affect immortals, it would affect humanity and even the souls of the dead. After much deliberation, Arathós came to a decision. "It's time," he stated. "Time for what?" Asteria, the immortal daughter of Coeus and Phoebe, wondered from her place on the other side of the room. She wasn't a culverter, something that surprised Arathós. She claimed to be a weaver, one who temporarily altered the connections of the web to bring about a desired change or effect. "It's time to force their hands," Arathós replied grimly. "Today we move to the great southern land. It's time I caught up with an old friend." "Whatever you think you will work." Asteria stood and walked to Arathos's side without question. Arathós placed one hand on her shoulder, concentrating on where he wanted to be. When Arathós opened his eyes, he found himself in the middle of a dense jungle. "I believe you told me the Great Southern Land was a desert," Asteria recalled. "This doesn't look like a desert." "That would be because it's not," Arathós agreed. Asteria was about to retort when a deep chuckle resonated from behind the tree line. You truly believed that your magic would have any potency within the borders of my realm?" "Nightshade, I assume?" Asteria raised an eyebrow. "Nightshade indeed," Nightshade chuckled, stepping into view in his long white robe. "Your power feels familiar. I know you." Asteria's brow furrowed. "You shouldn't remember me," Nightshade said, almost warningly. "A good friend will always remember," Asteria smiled warmly. "Closer to a relative," Nightshade rebutted. "Is it not the same?" Asteria wondered. "Not as I see it," Nightshade maintained. "I'm not one to be remembered." "You're a hero, Nightshade. I've seen what you do. Why keep pretending otherwise?" Nightshade ignored Asteria, instead turning to face a very confused Arathós. "I can bring you into my continent, but first I must relieve you of your weapons. I demand that no outsiders may take up arms against the Pharaon." Arathós and Asteria sat at a square table opposite Nightshade and a black-scaled humanoid reptile. On the right side of the table sat the Egyptian Ra and his great-grandchild Isis. On the left side of the table, the Asgardian Odin sat with his son Thor. "Why have you called us here, Arathós, Cronus' son?" Odin demanded impatiently. "Yes, why call us to counsel with such vile swine as these?" gesturing across the table to the Asgardians. "I suppose you must at least attempt to compensate for your incompetence in some way or another. Though I never did expect you to fall so far as to become grossly hypocritical," Thor scowled. "Domiptir!" Nightshade roared, silencing the arguing immortals immediately. "Thank you. Now if you would kindly stop bickering for a moment, then perhaps Arathós will inform you as to why he has brought you here." Arathós nodded his thanks to Nightshade before he stood and stepped away from the table so as to address the whole of the small council. The Olympians have turned their backs on this world, he stated. Their actions have set in motion a chain of events that will ultimately lead to a great war. This will be no mere war among men. It will be a war that spans throughout all the immortal councils and all of the aligned worlds. Nature will turn against itself, immortals will skirmish with men, and civilizations will burn. I've called you all here because I need your help to end this war before it begins, or to at least lessen its impact when it does. You are an Olympian, are you not? Why do you not solve your own disputes? Isis criticized, and Arathós sighed. I am of Olympus as much as Thor's brother Loki is of Jotunheim. I was cast out of my home for the pride and greed of my own family. I stand before you as a representative of Othrys, not of Olympus. You led the war against Othrys, and now you embrace them as your own? Standing beside them as you ask us to fight a war not our own? Ra scoffed. Do you have no honor? There is no honor in war, and I do not ask you to fight. I ask quite the opposite, Arathós defended. The Olympian Council is divided against itself. As it stands, no faction has enough supporters to back their cause. They wish to gain allies, and the only place they have left to turn is to other immortals. They wouldn't dare try to make peace with any forces as powerful as the Alf or the Feyran, but Asgard and Egypt are on their level. Arathós let his last sentence hang in the air for a moment before he continued. What I ask of you is to turn the Olympians away. The war may be inevitable, but we can stop it from gaining a foothold outside of Olympus. All I ask is that you do not interfere with the affairs of Olympus until their feud is over. If you would only do this, the war will be cut short and millions upon millions of innocent lives will be saved. You do not command Asgard, but your wish will be considered, at least briefly. Nightshade, if you would return us. Odin turned to the white-cloaked king of the great southern land, who nodded his head politely. Nightshade waved his hand, and Odin and Thor disappeared in a flash of purple fire. Arathós turned to Ra hopefully, but he was met with a far sourer response. You are a fool to believe that Olympus is as great a power as Egypt. A fool to believe there is even a comparison. I see why they cast you out. Ra turned to Nightshade without a word, and he and Isis were whisked away in the same fashion, leaving Arathós almost exactly where he had been, with almost no way to avoid an all-out war. Why do the Egyptians have to be so blind? He seethed, beating his clenched fist on the table. Trying to reason with the unreasonable is an act in futility. For many, death is a trapdoor that will not be observed until it has been rent from its place in the floor, and there is nothing left to hold on to but the sharp and broken frame that they once scorned so readily. When they are faced with the ultimate prospect, they will embrace your cause, Nightshade rationalized apologetically. Chapter 6. Into Darkness. Arathós walked up the beach of Rhea's island, Asteria by his side, simply flicking his wrist to dispel a portion of the shield around it. Much easier, he had learned, than reversing time for the whole coastline. Immediately he was met with a broadsword at his throat. Who dares to intrude on the haven of the Adresians? The guard demanded. Perseus, lower your weapon. I don't have time for games, Arathós scowled. You have no right to be here, Olympian. Leave now and your life shall be spared, Perseus threatened, and Arathos's scowl deepened. I invoke my birthright as the eldest son of Cronus. I wish to meet with the council. Perseus hesitated slightly at the tone of Arathos' usually calm and kind voice. Immediately, the immortal snapped impatiently. Yes, sir. Perseus bowed slightly, deciding that it wasn't worth his life to forsake a matter that had the calmest immortal he had ever met on edge. Within the hour, Arathós and Asteria stood before the former council of Othrys. Why have you demanded an audience with us, my child? Rhea inquired. I bring tidings of war, Arathós announced, knowing that this was all it would take to gain the full attention of every council member. I see no reason for this to be of importance to us, Iapetus, an immortal with power over mortality, countered. It is surely a war between Olympians, and therefore not worth our time and resources. This is not simply a war upon Olympus, brother. The Olympians are no more than catalysts in this affair, Cois, Asteria's own father, explained, earning himself a nod of thanks from Arathós. The tension between the clans of immortals has been at its limit for many hundreds of years. All it will take to invoke all-out war would be for the warring factions of Olympus to go to the other groups of immortals for aid, and the bonds keeping war at bay will snap. There will be conflict on scales unseen since the time of the primordials. The meager measures you've put in place to protect yourselves on this island will not be enough. This isn't a war you can escape by hiding like rabbits from a wolf. Sooner or later, if this war isn't stopped before it starts, you will be pulled in, just like everyone else. There is no doubt, so please do what's right by the world you live in. Please help me to ensure peace amongst immortals everywhere. I say we wait until they've worn each other down. Then we can bring them to their knees and take back the kingdom that's rightfully ours. Iapetus grinned triumphantly. I second the motion, Hyperion, a brother to Iapetus, agreed. I stand with you, Cryos, another brother, nodded. You are all fools, Cois growled. It would be much wiser to gain the allegiance of other immortals. Have them swear never to wade into the politics of Olympus. I will side with my daughter. Just as I will side with my son, Rhea stated definitively. I stand with the brave. Our weapons will glisten with the blood of the weakened Olympian fools, Thea beamed manically. What is wrong with all of you? Themis, a sister of Cronus, cried. Can't you see that you're doing exactly what Zeus wants? Arathós isn't an Olympian anymore. You all know that. They don't even remember his name. They call him Salvation, and you might all disagree, but I'd say he's ours. Our Salvation, and you all ignore him because he beat you once, in what was hardly even a real war. Arathós was surprised that the council knew that he was Salvation, although it was hardly a surprise with his own mother central to all their dealings. Themis is right. She gets it, unlike most of you. Asteria made Themis her example. Most of you don't know Arathós. We all ignored Cronus's little boy, but you know me. I've spent the last 10 years by his side, and let me tell you, he is just like his father before that thing corrupted him. You listened to Cronus because he always wanted what was best for you and for everyone else. Now listen to Arathós because he wants the same. The council was silent. Asteria had spoken only once, and she had outspoken them all, just the way they all remembered her. I believe we have an accord, Rhea stated smugly. Would anyone refute the son of mine who freed us all any further? Again there was silence. Only Rhea and Asteria amongst those in the room had known that it was Arathós, Salvation, who had been freeing the former residents of Othrys. They had all assumed he was simply running amok, causing mischief as petty revenge against his treacherous family. We are unanimous, Iapetus agreed begrudgingly. What is his lordship's first command? Cois wondered, struggling to hold back his triumphant grin. However, his voice dripping with sarcasm was enough for anyone to gauge how giddy he was to have one up on his brother. We treat with Nidavellir, Arathós replied after a moment of thought. It would be wise to gain the allegiance of the dwarves before any of the Olympians think to do the same. It is decided. We head for Nidavellir at once, Rhea announced. Ready the boats. That won't be necessary, Arathós interjected. I've learned to move myself through culversion. I'm sure that I'll be able to teach others to do the same. Many of the council stared at Arathós as if he had suddenly gone mad. Arathós stood outside the gates of Nidavellir alongside Cois, Oceanus, and Mnemosyne, 2 brothers and a sister of Cronus. The Culverter of Time strode up to the gates and raised his hand. Bang, bang, bang. Arathós knocked 3 times and waited for a response from the other side. Bang, bang, bang. Arathós knocked again after he had waited 5 minutes without any response. Another 5 minutes passed before a heavily armed guard at least 6 feet tall came into view. Who goes there? He demanded gruffly. I am Arathós, son of Cronus, son of Aranos. I represent the Council of Othrys alongside my companions, Cois, Oceanus, and Mnemosyne. We seek an allegiance with your people in order to safeguard all the worlds against the disorder amongst the Olympians, Arathós responded assertively. You are only 4, the guard wondered. We are only 4. We pose no threat to your realm, Arathós confirmed. You may pass through the portal, the guard decided, and the gates to Nidavellir swung open to reveal only a small, unassuming cave. The guard motioned for the group to follow him into the cave. Walking in skeptically, Arathós stepped out into a hall of pure gold, with great royal blue banners hanging from the ceiling. Each of the banners displayed a different scene in a battle that pitted a single wolf against a great army of Svartalf, or Dark Elves as some knew them, and fire demons led by the giant Surtur, their immortal king for all time. The final 2 banners showed the wolf standing victorious over the opposing army before it suddenly disappeared in a flash of gold light. Noticing where Arathós was looking, the armored guard took the time to explain. That is the legend of the wolf. Lore holds that many thousands of years ago, a great wolf dropped out of the sky at the beginning of the greatest war in dwarven history. The wolf stayed with us for many decades, training the soldiers and fighting with us in our battles against the demons and the Dark Elves. At the very end of the war, all of the enemy legions charged our citadel together. They would have wiped us out with their sheer numbers alone, and all of the dwarves were prepared to die honorably that day. But the wolf refused to let us fight. Instead, he stood alone against the entire army, and hours later he emerged victorious. When our warriors rushed onto the field to congratulate him on his victory, he simply disappeared in a flash of light. Dwarven belief still holds that one day, when all hope is gone, when we need him the most, he will return and fight alongside us once more. The guard removed his helmet to reveal a head of steel grey hair and a single tear making its way down the side of his face. He was the greatest warrior ever seen in any realm, and the best man you could ever hope to meet. If only he weren't so sad. You were there? Cois realized, though it was more of a statement than a question. It doesn't matter, the guard stated as he wiped the tear away. You're here to propose an alliance with our king. Follow me. I will bring you to him. Chapter 7. The Rise of Darkness. Arathós and his 3 companions were led into a bright room with dimly glowing light blue walls. The doorway was crafted out of a translucent dark blue stone and engraved with unfamiliar gold lettering. At the other end of the room stood a magnificent throne carved out of a single pure diamond. Behind the throne, the wall was decorated with an arch of silver and gold that seemed to flow from the floor like water from a spring. Upon the throne, the king of Nidavellir sat, adorned in flowing opalescent robes with a platinum lining. On either side of the king, a guard stood in lustrous golden armor. Each guard leaned on the pommel of his own golden greatsword. "Arathós, Crona's son for you, my lord," the guard escorting the 4 emissaries announced their presence before he bowed and strode quickly from the room. "Leave us," the king ordered. His 2 guards followed his command immediately. They twisted the pommels of their swords and disappeared in a thin white mist that cleared away almost instantaneously. "Konunga," Arathós greeted the dwarven king with a small bow, which Kois, Oceanus, and Mnemosyne hastily imitated. "You have no need to speak with me as a stranger or a superior friendie," the king chastised. "You would misplace your own traditions?" Arathós noted, eliciting a small smile from the dwarf king. "You have known me for so long, and yet you still question my ways," he sighed. "Why do I bother?" "Because you knew this day would come," Arathós replied to the rhetorical question. "You knew there would be a day when we would each be in need of the other's allegiance. You knew that it was inevitable that the threat of war would someday hold sway over the mortal and immortal worlds alike. You cannot deny this, old friend." The king rose from his throne and stepped forward, looking directly into Arathos's eyes. "Address me by my name, so I know that what you claim is not false," the king commanded, and Arathós did not falter. "I tell you nothing but the truth. A war threatens that would encompass all worlds, be they mortal or immortal, living or dead. I swear this to you, Yakum, king of Nidavellir, lord of the great dwarf halls, kinsman to the Alf, conqueror of the Svartalf, brother to the Jotun, master of the forge, friend of the wolf, banisher of darkness, herald of the earth, servant of chaos, and he who many wish had far fewer titles." Oceanus whistled in appreciation. "Just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?" he joked. "Indeed it does, Oceanus, Authoresian of the seas, and not much else," Yakum agreed with a grin, before his expression became serious once more. "You will have the allegiance of Nidavellir, friendy, but not yet. You must free us from our prison," he stated, turning to face the door of the throne room. "Follow me." Yakum led Arathós, Oceanus, Mnemosyne, and Kois down a narrow, winding hallway. The hall was lit by rows upon rows of dimly flickering torches. Only a meter above the heads of the 5 companions, a great grey mist churned, obscuring the extent of the cavern above them. "The great wolf conjured the fog above us. Legend tells that the horrors above are great enough to scar even the strongest Jotun for 20 cycles," Yakum explained. "How long is a cycle?" Mnemosyne wondered curiously. "A cycle is the lifetime of a lesser Asgardian," Arathós replied, "the child of an Aesir and an Alf. They have the powers and privileges of Asgardians, but time catches up to them just as it does to the elves. They live for a long time, though, usually around 5,000 years. "But that would mean that 20 cycles," Mnemosyne trailed off in horror. "What could possibly be that terrible?" "That is the most disturbing part of the legend," Yakum sighed deeply. "Supposedly, when he was asked what he had hidden, the wolf's only response was time." "Time," Arathós repeated quietly, but Yakum stopped in his tracks before the son of Cronus could make anything of it. This is why we cannot ally with you. If it weren't here, we would be free to leave Nidavellir. We would combine our influence with yours, and no immortal would feel the need to consort with the Olympians, Yakum revealed, gesturing to a swirling wall of gold at the far end of a vast, dark hall that expanded from the narrow tunnel they had been traveling down. It's a gateway, Kois observed, but it's closed. Why? This is the way into Svartalfheim, the realm of the Dark Elves, Yakum sneered. Once a great and noble race overtaken by their greed and lust for power. Almost all the elves of Svartalfheim have fallen to the levels of sorcerers and mercenaries. It's nigh impossible to find even a single uncorrupted Svartalf anymore. It is disgraceful. Okay, that makes sense, but why you keep the gateway sealed? Wouldn't it be easier to just position some guards outside? Oceanus hypothesized. The Dark Elves have always been more powerful than us. They would sweep through Nidavellir and destroy us all. It was only by pure dumb luck that we were able to defeat them in the last war. You could still leave, though. The seal doesn't stop you, does it? Arathós wondered. The gateway behind the seal drains the vitality of every dwarf in Nidavellir. Some sorcerer on the other side bound us to it. If we move too far, the bond snaps and we die. If too many of us come too close, the seal begins to deteriorate. Whatever demonic creature resides on the other side of that seal is trying to use our power to break it. If it breaks, then the Dark Elves pour into this realm, destroying everything in their path. That is not an option. Just as Yakum finished his explanation, visible streams of power were torn from the chests of Arathós and his three companions. The power siphoned into the seal, and a huge blood-red crack began to open, wider and wider, slowly slithering its way from one corner of the wall to the other. Arathós fell to his knees in exhaustion. I think it just became an option, he quavered. Arathós summoned his sword to his hand with a flash, leaning on it for support as the great red crack branched out, forming a gigantic web. I made a mistake in bringing the four of you here, Yakum admitted shamefully. Before Arathós could comfort the Dwarf King, the seal exploded into 1,000 tiny gold fragments. A single figure, dark hair and pale skin, dressed in pitch-black robes, laughed mockingly. I thought I felt power, he smiled cruelly. Culverters. It's been a long while since I met one of your breed. Sorcerer, Yakum growled. You'll rue the day you Iptremis. The man intoned. His hand was shrouded in a logic-defying black light that spread into the eyes of the Dwarven King. Kneel, he ordered, and Yakum obeyed. I assure you, my dear uneducated king, I am no sorcerer. I am a weaver and once a conveyor, but never a sorcerer. I have no need of such primitive magic. You're no Svartalf, what are you? Kois demanded breathily. The robed man turned to him and smiled just as cruelly as he had before. Iptremis, he intoned again, and Kois was taken over just as Yakum had been. Semi-intelligent conversation at last, he revelled. I am a Cathalian of the planet Cathalia, or rather, the Cathalian. My world was destroyed, but never fear, I still stand to carry its legacy. What do you want? Nemesis worried. I want what is mine, no more, no less. the man replied simply. Iptremis. Mnemosyne gasped, trying to resist his power, but to no avail. Her eyes turned black and she was taken over, just like the others. Let them go, Arathós commanded. The man only laughed. Let them go. I think not. I think I'll have the last one, too. Iptremis. Oceanus didn't even have time to react before he was another of the man's unwilling slaves. Who are you? What's yours? Arathós hauled himself to his feet. I am Nekroth of Cathalia. What is mine is my love and my life. I seek to save this universe, myself and my love from the darkness. He who would dare to separate us. You want to protect the world? Let us help you. Let them go and we can work together, Arathós offered. No, we cannot work together. I cannot work with a righteous man, one who believes in right and wrong. I would destroy a world to save all others. You wouldn't, would you? Nekroth walked past Arathós and with one hand clipped him on the forehead, sending the immortal onto his back. You are powerful. More so than me, even. I can't take your mind, but I can keep you out of my way. I'll stop you. Arathós managed to drag himself up onto all fours. I won't let you destroy this world. This world? Oh no. I'm only passing through this world. I seek another planet, one called Earth. Arathos's eyes widened, and that did not go unnoticed by Nekroth. Your world, is it? Earth? Nekroth crouched by Arathos's side. How, pray tell, do you plan to stop me? Killing me? I think not. Such a moral man as yourself. Pitiful. Nekroth wrapped a hand around Arathos's throat and lifted him off the ground, the Culverter of Time's sword clattering down beside him. Still, you might be dangerous. You might try to stop me. I can feel your immortality. Don't imagine I'm enough of a fool to bless you with one of your regenerative states. I think I'll send you away. Far, far away. Nekroth drew a black staff from his back with his free hand and beat it against the ground. Dusty. A rough red circle formed before the Cathalian. Damnation, Nekroth announced, taking Arathos's struggling as questioning. Enjoy your stay. Nekroth heaved Arathós forwards and into his rapidly deteriorating red portal. Arathos's still struggling body disappeared and the churning gateway sputtered out. Nothing left but a memory and a sword on the stone floor. You, Dwarf King, you'll lead me through your gateway to Earth. Your subjects will not slow us. Yes, my master, Yakum complied. Nekroth led an army of Svartalf through Nidavellir, his thrall Yakum ensuring that no dwarf stood in his way. Soon enough, the army had made its way to the portal to Earth, making their way through 6 abreast. Halt, Nekroth ordered, striding to the head of his army, where Yakum and the 3 immortals all stood. Nekroth stared at Oceanus for a moment before he smiled. Kill him, he ordered, gesturing to Yakum. Unable to question his orders, Oceanus immediately hefted his sword and drew it across the throat of the Dwarven king, killing him in mere moments. Necroth grinned, celebrating his unwavering control over a once proud and powerful immortal. Necroth moved on to Mnemosyne, caressing her cheek in a sickening manner. "Such beauty," he crooned, "wasted on one so weak." Necroth turned his head to face Cois and Oceanus once more. "Such power, such potential. You'll do well." Necroth smiled before he turned back to Mnemosyne. "If you have any worth, I don't see it." "Onwards, bring me what is mine," Necroth commanded. Over the days that followed, Necroth crushed all who stood in his path to his love, mortals and immortals alike. During the nights, Necroth burned the cities and towns of humanity to the ground for the sake of entertainment. Their lives mattered not. The earth would burn regardless. "Something is amiss in the pathweb," Asteria reported to the Council of Orthrus. "The wind of life falters, and the wind of death shines brighter than it ever has in all living memory." "It's here, isn't it?" Rhea inquired. "Yes, my lady. That which corrupted your husband has returned." Chapter 8. Betrayal. "The nightingale, son of none, god of the mind," Zeus proclaimed loudly. "You stand accused of working with the Titans, working against Olympus. How do you plead?" Of course, the claim was entirely false, and the nightingale knew that, just as Zeus did. This was simply a way for the paranoid king of Olympus to rid himself of one of the most powerful threats to his position. "I do not," the nightingale replied coldly. "I do not plead to a man who names himself a god and assigns his enemies childish nicknames." "Titans? Really?" "Rather, I accuse you of betrayal. A betrayal that you don't even recall. The entire human race never forgot, unlike you. The stories are twisted by word of mouth, it's true, but at their heart they remain much the same. Horror stories, and you are the horrors. Your days are numbered, Lord Zeus. The one you betrayed will return, and I with him. We'll have a willing army of billions behind us, all the humans and all the animals on Earth, all willing to rise up against the same dictators. Do you truly believe that you'll stand a chance?" "How do you plead?" Zeus repeated. The nightingale replied in kind, "I do not." Zeus's nostrils flared alongside his temper. "You will respect your king," he roared, electricity rolling over his clenched fists. The king of Olympus did not even attempt to restrain his anger. "Do you truly believe that such a pitiful display of power will frighten me?" "You believe many fallacies, don't you?" the nightingale wondered. "I am the nightingale, culverter of the mind. I know what you plan, and I am resigned to it. But know that if you carry your plan further, if you attempt to engage me in single combat, you will lose. I know every move you make before you make it. I'll know every thought that runs through your head before you think it. Next to me, you are nothing. Disrespect me again and I will make you fade," Zeus threatened. "How?" "What? You heard me. How will you make me fade?" the nightingale implored. I will destroy the domains that bind you to this plane of existence. How else would I make you fade? Zeus replied confusedly. You would have to destroy every mind in the universe, including your own. Would you genuinely consider making me fade? There are 12 of us, and only one of you, Zeus stated confidently. We may not be able to make you fade, but we will come very, very close. The nightingale laughed mirthlessly. You, a match for me, he wondered, staring pointedly at Artemis, who nodded reluctantly. Execute him, Zeus ordered, and he rose from his throne, charging the nightingale alongside Poseidon, Demeter, Athena, Ares, Aphrodite, and Hermes, whilst Apollo, Artemis, Hephaestus, Hera, and Hestia hung back, unwilling to assault the nightingale. He was far too close to their hearts. The nightingale threw his hands out to his sides, producing 2 telekinetic waves that collided with Ares and Athena, casting them against the throne room walls, removing them from the battle almost instantly. Poseidon threw his trident at the nightingale, hoping to impale him through the chest. But instead, under the nightingale's will, the trident veered off course and circled all the way around the nightingale. The immortal's own weapon flew directly through its owner's stomach and embedded itself in the throne behind him. The nightingale met Demeter and Hermes head-on, catching both in the chest with his iron-hard fists. The nightingale quickly changed the direction of his charge, bringing both of his attackers to the ground with enough force to crack the marble floor. The nightingale turned around quickly, catching Aphrodite by the throat. She had tried to sneak up behind him. Before she could even attempt to charm him, the nightingale threw her against the wall, alongside Ares and Athena, leaving only one Olympian foolish enough to face him. Guilty, then, I say. Guilty! Zeus was on the verge of a tantrum. You are to be sentenced to the arena of Tartarus. I know where you sentence your nightmares, Zeus, the nightingale stated calmly. He held his hand face down over the floor at the very center of the room. The marble cracked and fell away into a portal, an imperfect red circle churning violently. The nightingale knew Zeus would go after his family next, his friends, everyone he loved. The nightingale stepped purposefully between Zeus and the vortex. I'll return. You do best to remember me. I'm not as forgiving as salvation. The nightingale spread his arms and let himself fall. The nightingale reappeared inside an arena of some description, turning to take in all of his surroundings. He saw that the stands were packed with creatures of all shapes and sizes, some humanoid, some entirely unrecognizable. Perchance we have a new competitor, a deep voice rang out, echoing through the stadium. What is your name, immortal? Give me yours, and I might grace you with my own, the nightingale stated, half-jokingly, turning to face the owner of the voice. Of course, young one. My name is Erebus, primordial of darkness. Now I do believe it's your turn. Erebus was black. Not black-skinned, rather he was just black. A mass of pure black energy fading slightly around the edges. The nightingale would be fighting in this arena. He knew that now. He could never stand against a primordial. The culvertor of the mind steeled his nerves, readying himself to release the only words that remained between himself and a life of hardship and bloodshed inside Erebus's arena. My name. He tried. He tried so hard to say his real name. One who knows love, it meant in Asterianatic, the language of magic. It was impossible to lie in Asterianatic. That's why his parents named him the way they did. Only those who loved him in some way were capable of saying his name. Even now his tongue caught in his throat, refusing to form the word. My name is the Nightingale. Chapter 9. To Doubt. Arathós slowly began to pick himself up off the rocky ground. Small shards of black and red glass dug into his skin. It was difficult for Arathós to see through the thick layers of maroon smoke that rolled over the landscape of what he recognized as Tartarus. But in the distance he could barely make out the shape of a solitary mountain. A bright red light adorned the peak of the mountain, like a tantalizing beacon of hope. Arathós hauled himself to his feet with no small effort before immediately falling back down. An unbearable stinging sensation rushed through his right calf. Arathós stretched his legs out in front of him so he might see his injury. Looking down at his legs, it was all Arathós could do to stop himself from throwing up. A sharp point of pale silver bone was visible through a growing pool of silver blood and a disgusting pale gold fluid. Arathos's flesh splintered away in thick, fibrous lumps, each laceration stretching the skin like the leather on a tanning rack. The majority of the remaining skin on Arathos's leg was torn to shreds as if it had been dragged carelessly over the glass-strewn ground. Arathós gritted his teeth and grabbed his leg with both hands, steadily resetting the broken bone. The Culvertor of Darkness reached out to the shadows cast by the maroon smoke and pulled them to his leg, solidifying them into a makeshift cast. Arathós stood up once more, his leg shaking ever so slightly, but otherwise he was fine. The immortal began to limp slowly towards the great mountain that loomed ominously in the distance. By Arathos's own sense of time, it took him one whole day and night to reach the base of the lone mountain. Arathós climbed the mountain. He hiked, limping on his broken leg for hours until he finally reached the peak. Arathós, son of Cronus. Arathós stared at the one who had spoken with unveiled confusion. Tell me, Arathós, what do you see? Me. You're me, Arathós answered honestly. The lips of Arathos's doppelganger quirked into a faint smile. I assure you, I'm not you. I am Tartarus. I am perceived as that in which the majority of an individual's doubts lie. You're only the second to see yourself. Tartarus, the primordial? Arathós ignored his spiel on doubt. Tartarus nodded in confirmation. Can you help me get back to the surface, to stop that man? The surface? Yes, the surface, above us, the surface of the earth. You're a primordial, surely you care what happens to the earth? I am a primordial, yes. But not of your earth. Why do you think that you can only reach my world via portal? I assumed that the surface of the earth was too thick to dig through to the pit, Arathós shrugged. Tartarus smiled bemusedly. It's true. Earth's crust would be much too thick to dig through, and you'd find that it would become much too hot to continue digging once you dug deep enough. But no, Tartarus does not reside within Earth. Tartarus is a world, a planet in its own right, and I am its sole original primordial. I care little for Earth. It isn't my home. However, I do care for your father. Cronus is a dear friend of mine. So I'll make you a deal. Tartarus didn't continue. What deal would you make? Arathós wondered. Cronus is fading. Go to your father here on my world. Stay with him until he passes, and do your best to make him comfortable and unburdened when he does. Do this for me, and I'll send you back to your Earth, as near to the Cathalian Necroth as I can place you. Do we have an accord? We do. Splendid. Fly for me, Cronus requested. What? Why, you're dying, father. I can't let you die alone, Arathós protested. Those mortals you love so much on Earth, they have a concept of a last request, don't they? They do, Arathós confirmed. Consider it mine, then, that you fly for me. Won't you allow an old man his fantasies? I'd like to imagine that I've done at least one good thing, Cronus pleaded. Arathós didn't argue. The immortal stood from his father's side and stepped back a few paces. Arathós spread his arms, palms facing the sky. Bright white light coalesced in Arathos's open palms. The light flowed like an impossible liquid up his arms and over his back. The light began to spread away from Arathos's back, no longer adhering to his skin, but rather to itself. The formless white light took form. Bright feathers rose up, stacking themselves upon one another, reaching out further and further and further, until 2 wings had unfurled themselves, each one as long as Arathós was tall. Cronus grinned proudly when Arathós flapped his wings and took to the skies. Cronus had taken it upon himself to train his son to properly focus his powers, and he admitted to himself that, at least this once, he had done something right. Cronus watched Arathós loop through the air, enjoying the powerful exhilaration that flight obviously gave to his eldest child. Come back down, Cronus called, and Arathós obeyed. Is there anything else you need? Arathós wondered as soon as he made his way back to his father. I'm fairly sure that was supposed to be my last request. If you don't mind, I'd like you to sing me a song. A song, of course. Which song? A very special song. Cronus leaned up and whispered in Arathos's ear. It took him more than a few moments, but he managed to give Arathós every word. I've never heard that song, Arathós admitted. And now you get to hear yourself singing it. A reward for both of us, I'm sure, Cronus grinned. Arathós smiled sadly. It would be the last thing his father ever heard, but it was what he wanted, so Arathós started to sing. Fly, my beloved, amongst the stars so bright. Fly, my beloved, through the heavens so high. Sleep now, my child, dream the sweetest dream. Rest now, my warrior, your memory will keep. Up through the mountains, down by the streams, into the meadows, high as the trees. Cronus was smiling serenely. He prayed the melody would never end. Where moonlight does shine, where heartstrings grow, our love shall be with you wherever you go. Live for your children, live for the world, fly through the valleys, through wonders untold. Cronus's eyes drifted closed. The ancient culvertor of time had faded, but Arathós couldn't bear the thought of leaving his father's song unfinished. Fly, my beloved, amongst the stars so bright. Fly, my beloved, through the heavens so high. Sleep now, my child, dream the sweetest dream. Rest now, my warrior, your memory will keep. Up through the mountains, down by the streams, into the meadows, high as the trees. Cronus's skin began to glow. The faded immortal's white beard receded into only light brown stubble. Hair grew from Cronus's bald scalp, the same light brown. The wrinkles on his old face smoothed over, leaving a perfect tanned complexion behind. For Arathós it was almost like looking into a mirror, until Cronus's skin began to break apart, rising into the sky in white flakes. The flakes themselves broke into stardust, scattering high in the murky atmosphere of Tartarus. Brilliantly, the smoke and fog that always hung in the Tartarian air cleared away, forging a passage for Cronus's stardust to rise up and away into a beautiful turquoise sky, never seen before by anyone but Tartarus himself. Soon Cronus was gone, and Arathós was kneeling next to naught but another patch of rocky ground. The passage through the maroon smog remained, a natural skylight commemorating a great man and an even greater father. Arathós couldn't help but smile despite his loss. He had given his father everything he had ever wanted, and for one perfect moment at the end of his life, he had been happy. Arathós landed atop Tartarus's mountain, the broad surface of his wings bringing him quickly to a halt. "Cronus has faded," Tartarus announced. "Yes," Arathós agreed. "Our accord." "I have not forgotten," Tartarus smiled. He pointed to the bright red light above the mountain, a vortex, a portal. "It will take you anywhere you want to go. Think of anywhere or anyone, and it will take you there. You have my word." Tartarus added the last sentence after seeing Arathos's dubious stare. The culvertor of time nodded, accepting the primordial's honesty. Arathós spread his wings and leaped, only the cruel, callous face of the last Cathalian in his mind. Chapter 10. Time Reborn. Artemis and Apollo stood back to back, firing arrows into the enemy army with devastating power and accuracy. Each arrow shot from one of the twins' bows could cut through up to 10 of Necroth's soldiers before coming to rest on the sandy plains of the Saharan desert. "Hey, sis. I think I can see the big guy," Apollo called over the commotion. "Are you sure?" Artemis worried. "Pretty sure. Take a look." The twins quickly swapped places. Artemis harnessed the power of the moon to fire an arrow that obliterated all of the forces blocking her view. Sure enough, in an enormous chariot overlooking the battle, Artemis could easily make out the form of Necroth leaning casually on his staff, occasionally flicking his wrist to incinerate a warrior who came too close to his chariot. "It's him, all right," Artemis agreed. How many do you think we need to take him? Apollo considered for a moment, still firing arrows at an impossible rate. We're hunters. We're the only ones who even have a chance of getting close to the bastard, he decided. Lelantos? Artemis guessed. Lelantos, Apollo agreed. On cue, Artemis fired an arrow into the air, and Apollo followed suit. The arrows collided, exploding in a shower of silver sparks that blew in every direction. The twins didn't have time to admire their handiwork, for they were immediately pulled back into the battle by the seemingly infinite ranks of soldiers who charged them from every direction. I am having a very bad day, Lelantos complained to the enemies he was slaughtering with his hunting knives. First, I get dragged into a war with a wannabe god with fashion issues. Seriously, who wears black all the time? The Othresian of the hunt spun in a circle, decapitating all of the soldiers who had moved too close to him. Next, I get pulled into a battle that the overspoiled brats who imprisoned me for absolutely no good reason refused to fight in. Now I've been separated from all the other immortals, and I'm fighting a bunch of amateurs who insist on attacking me one at a time. Lelantos easily sliced the throat of his next attacker before he returned to his rant, each word punctuated by the sound of another one of his enemies hitting the ground with a loud bang. My day could not get any worse. Suddenly, Lelantos was blinded by a bright silver light. When he looked back, he saw a brilliant shower of sparks. Finally! Something interesting, Lelantos grinned. Sorry, boys. That little chat will have to wait for later. See ya. Lelantos put away his hunting knives and pulled out his bow. The immortal jumped onto the top of an enemy's head. Lelantos began to flip his way over the top of Necrot's army, sniping random targets as he went. Finally, Lelantos pulled a soldier from the army up to his level and shot him through the heart. The Othresian used the body like a surfboard, landing perfectly next to the twin archers. So, how's my favourite niece? Lelantos wondered with a manic grin. What about me? Apollo complained. Aren't I your favourite nephew? You're okay, I guess. Lelantos shrugged, non-committally. Okay, Apollo exclaimed. I'm okay. You're definitely not getting invited to my next birthday party. Apollo, you've never had a birthday party, Artemis reminded the culverter of the sun. Don't ruin my dreams, Apollo sobbed melodramatically. Artemis sighed exasperatedly, although she still allowed herself a small smile at her twin's childishness. Let's just get on with this. We can act like 3-year-olds later, Artemis chided, before she turned to Lelantos. We're going to sneak up on Necroth and try to take him out, Artemis informed her uncle. We need you to distract him while we get rid of any guards he might have. Then all 3 of us will face him at once, and hopefully we can defeat him. So, annoy the wannabe god in the astonishingly clean black dress, Lelantos confirmed, grinning in anticipation. Yes, Artemis agreed. Just do what you do best. All 3 immortals turned towards Necroth's chariot. I'll take the left flank. Artemis, you take the right. Lelantos? Have fun, Apollo suggested. Artemis and Lelantos nodded their agreement. The 3 charged in their respective directions, cutting through the enemy army's ranks like hot knives through butter. Asteria stood with her daughter Hecate at the head of an army of mortal weavers and sorcerers. Take this, Asteria offered her daughter a dark blue glowing stone. Mother, I can't. Hecate tried to object, but Asteria interrupted her. Hecate, I have a pathway manipulator of my own. Please, take my spare. I only wish you to be safe. Hecate did as she was bid, taking the pathweb manipulator that immediately shimmered and changed color to a bright green that perfectly matched Hecate's eye color. Hecate pressed the pathweb manipulator to the head of her staff and muttered a spell, such that the 2 merged. With the pathweb manipulator inside the head of the staff, it began to burn with a bright green flame. The flames enveloped the length of the staff, not bothering Hecate in the slightest. The immortal weaver smiled wickedly. She turned to the magicians who stood behind her, awaiting her orders. To the left of the magicians' army stood the immortals of Persia, an immortal army who called themselves the Celts, magic users, but not weavers or sorcerers. Beyond them, a blond man led an army of mortal warriors. They were not magic users, but were still just as much a force to be reckoned with. To the right of the magicians, the combined might of Asgard and Jotunheim, a small ice island between Africa and Nightshade's continent, stood ready. Asgardians and Jotuns working together for the first time in living memory. Many of the world's immortals had refused to fight in the war against Nekroth. The Chinese, Aztecs, and Mayans were among them. The dragons of the south, or Feyran as they preferred to be known, were occupied with a war of their own and could not spare any soldiers to fight Nekroth's army. The majority of Olympians had refused to fight too, believing the threat of Nekroth to be beneath them. The Othresians easily filled the small void the Olympians left, however, regaining the moral high ground they decidedly lost during the Immortal War. "Forward!" Hecate commanded her troops. The allied armies quickly followed suit, charging to meet Nekroth's army head-on. The allied armies were far more skilled than Nekroth's, but the Cathalian had made up for that, enslaving thousands of soldiers from every world he could reach, and summoning just as many spectral warriors, pure black, faceless beasts built solely of Nekroth's own power. Nekroth had the immortals and humans outnumbered 20-1. Nekroth's strategy appeared to be working, with casualties quickly rising on both sides of the battle. Hecate and Asteria were separated from the rest of their army, as were many of the more skilled allied warriors. Hecate swept her staff in a horizontal arc, conjuring a jet of green flames that tore the enemy soldiers in half at the waist. The immortal woman began to fight with more confidence, handling her staff very comfortably. She cut down spectral warriors like corn in a field. Hecate spied Nekroth looming over the battle in his chariot and tapped her mother on the shoulder. Asteria pounded her own staff on the ground, summoning a ring of blue fire that kept Nekroth's soldiers at bay long enough for her to turn to her daughter questioningly. Hecate pointed to Nekroth where he stood above the battle, and Asteria nodded in understanding. The mother and daughter did not need words to communicate with one another. Asteria let her circle of flames dissipate and began to forge her way towards Nekroth's chariot, trusting Hecate to defend her from behind. When she reached the right flank of Nekroth's chariot, Artemis found herself face to face with Mnemosyne, one of the immortals who had helped raise her and Apollo as children on the island of Delos. Artemis assessed Mnemosyne's body. She could see multiple cuts running around the immortal of memory's wrists, ankles, and neck. Injuries that could only be gained from struggling against metal shackles, or being dragged by them at the very least. Artemis wondered why Nekroth would chain a person who he had already made willing to carry out his every demand. Artemis looked into Mnemosyne's unnaturally broken black eyes. Artemis realized the truth, and she was angrier with Nekroth than she thought was even possible. "I will kill you for this, Nekroth," Artemis muttered under her breath before she met Mnemosyne in battle. The severely injured immortal didn't put up much of a fight, and Artemis was able to quickly knock her down with a concise blow to the head. Artemis laid her hand on Mnemosyne's shoulder and transported her to somewhere safe in a barely visible silver flash. Artemis was glad Hestia had trusted her enough to teach her how to move things through her domains. Artemis drove one of her knives into the side of Nekroth's castle-sized chariot that was being drawn by huge African elephants. She planted her other knife a little higher and began the long climb up to the top. occasionally having to deflect arrows fired by Necroth's army below. Arathós approached the left side of Necroth's chariot, aware that he would almost certainly have to fight one of the Othresians Necroth had enslaved. Apollo's fears were confirmed when he was forced to react quickly to an unexpected blow flying at him from his right side at breakneck speed. Apollo rolled out of the way of the strike, rising back up face to face with his grandfather Kois, a peaceful man staring down at his own grandson with malevolent, unrecognizing eyes. Kois threw another blow that Apollo was forced to block with his twin hunting knives. He only had just enough time to raise them. Apollo's right arm took the brunt of the impact, leaving it numb from the wrist to the shoulder. Koi's strikes continued to rain down faster and faster, and Apollo was barely able to keep up. Apollo knew that he was outclassed as a warrior, but he was never one to fight fair. The immortal raised his hand to the sky and redirected the light of the sun into Kois's eyes, blinding the Othresian, who struck forward immediately, just as a trained warrior should. Apollo leaped to the side, but Kois heard him and struck out with his free hand, catching Apollo in the chest and throwing him into the compact sand of the Saharan plain. Kois quickly regained his sight and charged Apollo with a sword raised. "You die now, Olympian," he growled angrily, bringing his sword down to cleave Apollo in two. Apollo blocked the strike once again with his hunting knives, but this time they were thrown out of his hands. Fortunately for Apollo, Kois staggered slightly, having dedicated too much power to his strike. Apollo had just enough time to get back on his feet. Apollo had one more trick left. He called on his power of prophecy, praying that Kois wasn't one of the rare immortals who proved unpredictable, just like a human. He wasn't. Apollo saw a faded golden image of Kois swinging his sword just before he actually did. Apollo was easily able to move out of the way of every one of Kois's attacks. Apollo balled his fists, searching for an opening. After managing only a few quick blows in the few short minutes in which he had been using his prophetic powers, Apollo finally found the opening he needed. Cocking back his fist, Apollo brought Kois down with a single devastating punch to the side of the head. Apollo fell to his knees, exhausted by the huge effort it had taken for him to uphold his power of prophecy for so long. Remembering his goal, Apollo collected his hunting knives and continued to Necroth's chariot. Apollo pulled a thin cord from his belt and tied it near the end of one of his arrows. Apollo fired the arrow into the side of Necroth's chariot, near the top. The immortal took hold of the long cord and began to quickly pull himself up the side of the huge chariot, wrapping the cord around his hand to maintain his grip. Hecate and Asteria found themselves at the back of Necroth's chariot, having obliterated all of the spectral soldiers that stood in their way. Both mother and daughter took the defensive when they saw Oceanus, the Othresian of the seas, staring them down. When she saw Oceanus's black eyes with thin veins of black creeping into the skin around them, Asteria lowered her staff. "Mother, what are you doing?" Hecate worried. "I know that magic," Asteria muttered, taking no heed of her daughter's words. "What magic?" Hecate wondered impatiently. Oceanus was slowly stalking towards the mother and daughter. "Iptremis," Asteria replied in a dark tone. "You wouldn't dare," Hecate gasped in disbelief. Evidently, he would. Both mother and daughter directed their staffs towards Oceanus. "Excopfir," the pair intoned simultaneously, producing beams of pure white light that surged into Oceanus's form, raising him off the ground with his arms outstretched beside him. The veins of black surrounding the immortal's eyes slowly crept back until they were no more. After a few moments, the black eyes of the enslaved Oceanus were overtaken by the white light of Asteria and Hecate's own magic. The mother and daughter lowered their staffs, letting Oceanus fall back to the ground, his eyes and his freedom restored to their normal state. "Why did I agree to this?" Lelantos asked himself as he neared Necroth's chariot. "Distract the guy with the big magic stick," he sighed. "This'll be easy, so very, very easy." Suddenly, Lelantos realized he was standing in front of a very large elephant. "Oh, hello, Mr. Elephant," Lelantos squeaked breathlessly. Upon hearing Lelantos's voice, the great African elephant raised its foot to squash the immortal. The elephant reared back when a very sharp arrow found its way into the bottom of its foot. "Oh, you did not just do that," Lelantos exclaimed angrily. The culverter of air called upon the winds to do his bidding. Lelantos rose into the sky, riding the top of a supersonic tornado. "I am Lelantos. I am he who goes unseen. I am the lord of the air. I am the blade in the darkness, the storm in the night. And you are not my problem. Please stay out of my way." Lelantos stepped off his tornado and onto the elephant's back. The Othresian saw Necroth leaning on his staff, staring over the battle, and he grinned in anticipation. Lelantos fashioned a large harp out of the air and started to play a soft tune. Necroth took no notice of the music until Lelantos called out to him, "Hey, Giddy McGitface." "Who dares mock Necroth?" Necroth demanded angrily. Lelantos considered for a moment before he replied, "No, I prefer Git. It's just like you, short, tacky, not worth the effort." "You will not belittle the savior of the universe." Lelantos cut off Necroth, playing his harp louder. He proceeded to sing a song. "Oh, Necroth's a git, he's a big black twit, he's the biggest git in the land. He's the poster git, if there ever was a git that all the world demands." "You will cease this instant, else I will destroy you," Necroth hissed, but Lelantos just sang louder, beginning to dance as he played on the elephant's back. "Come on, you know the words," he cried out. "Sing it with me." "Oh, Necroth's a git, he's a big black twit, he's the biggest git in the land. He's the poster git, if there ever was a git that all the world demands." Lelantos looked up and found Necroth barely holding himself together. He was clutching his staff so tight that his knuckles were noticeably white, even from the back of the elephant. "If you prefer nitwit, I've got a song for that too," Lelantos teased innocently. "I will kill you," Necroth roared, raising his staff to release a plume of black fire at the astonishingly irritating immortal. But before he could, a silver arrow raced towards the back of his head, and he was forced to duck to avoid it. Necroth turned on his heel to find 5 angry immortals, all with their weapons at the ready. Apollo quickly nocked another arrow and aimed for Necroth once more. "Surrender, Necroth, or we will end you," he promised. "You think that you need to fight me 6 against 1? Necroth chuckled. "How adorable. So you surrender?" Artemis wondered hopefully. Necroth chuckled again. "Oh, my dear, you misunderstand me. I'm afraid not even 20 of you could hope to defeat someone as flawless as me." "He's right," Lelantos called out from his place atop one of Necroth's elephants. "He doesn't have any flaws." "You see, even your irritating friend agrees with me," Necroth smiled triumphantly. He is a flaw. Lelantos finished with a grin. Necroth's demeanor turned to one of anger, and his staff lit up with a violent black flame. Iptremis, he roared, pounding his staff on the floor of his chariot. Black flames began to branch out in a wide circle, but this time Necroth's spell was quickly cut off by Asteria's own. Excop fear, the Othresian weaver intoned calmly, conjuring a bright white light that easily extinguished Necroth's black flames. Impossible. Necroth's eyes widened in shock. I am unmatched in my craft. Asterianatic is my language, boy, Asteria snarled. I created it. It is mine to command. Necroth let his staff catch fire once more. Asterianatic, he snorted. The language of the pathweb predates both you and I, girl. Artemis, Apollo, and Lelantos began to fire their arrows simultaneously, but Necroth managed to intercept them all easily. Oceanus charged at Necroth, trident in hand. Even having to block every arrow that was being shot his way, Necroth kept up with the Othresian with ease. Asteria and Hecate flanked Necroth on both sides, finally making it somewhat difficult for the Cathalian to keep up. Necroth whispered an incantation, and a bright flash of light lit up the end of his staff. Necroth used the distraction to hook Oceanus's trident and kick the Othresian in the chest onto the ground. Oceanus tried to call his weapon back to his hand, but Necroth brought his staff down onto it, shattering it into dozens of tiny pieces. Necroth fired a small black fireball from the end of his staff. The fire collided with Oceanus's head and immediately knocked him unconscious. Necroth turned his staff to be horizontal in his hand before he stepped between Asteria and her daughter. Black blades suddenly protruded from each side of the weapon. The blades skewered both Asteria and Hecate through their stomachs. Necroth spun his staff over his head and used the momentum to throw both mother and daughter into the wall of his chariot, where they stayed, too injured to keep fighting. Artemis, Apollo, and Lelantos abandoned their bows and unsheathed their hunting knives. Necroth quickly downed Apollo. The immortal was not accustomed to close combat. Lelantos used his power over the wind to throw Necroth into the air, but the Cathalian used the height to his advantage. Necroth used Lelantos' chest as a springboard, back-flipping off the immortal to break his fall. Before Lelantos could regain his bearings, Necroth rushed forward and gave him a sharp jab to the temple, filling his vision with nothing but black. Necroth turned back to Artemis, expecting to be able to dispatch her just as easily as he had dispatched the rest. But to his astonishment, she was able to hold her own against him. The adversaries would have been a blur to anyone looking on, both moving faster than anyone else on the battlefield could follow. Once in a while, Necroth or Artemis would charge one of their attacks with their own power, resulting in blinding explosions that shook the battlefield and swept many soldiers off their feet. The same could not be said for Necroth and Artemis. Both kept their balance and held their ground in a spectacular stalemate, until finally Necroth blasted one of the two elephants that kept the chariot upright, and it toppled to the side. Artemis was caught off guard, and she only just managed to break her fall with a roll. Artemis reached for her hunting knives, but Necroth quickly kicked them out of her reach. Time to die, Culverta, Necroth smirked triumphantly, raising his staff to deliver a killing blow. Before Necroth could strike, a great explosion sounded from behind the collapsed chariot. Both Necroth and Artemis turned their heads to the sight of Necroth's entire chariot exploding in a spectacular flash of gold and white. A single figure walked through the wreckage, adorned with shining golden armor and beautiful wings crafted out of pure white light. The man held a pitch-black sword in his hand that pulsed with unknown power. Arathós had returned, more powerful than ever before. Chapter 11. Invasion. Nightshade opened his hand, and a sphere of pure energy expanded across the battlefield. Dozens of Faerun who had chosen to rebel against his rule were thrown off their feet. "It's been far too long," Nightshade grinned excitedly. The ancient king of the Faerun sprinted onto the battlefield, transforming into a dazzling silver dragon mid-stride. Nightshade was easily 10 times the size of the next greatest dragon on the battlefield. The enormous silver dragon took to the skies, spraying vibrant purple flames over all those who dared oppose his rule. The flames didn't harm the dragons. Rather, Nightshade commanded them to form an unbreakable cage around each of the rebelling dragons. The second wave of rebelling Faerun could be seen on the horizon to the east, in stark contrast with the rising sun. As the dragons grew closer, they began to realize Nightshade's truly unrivaled power. Still, the second wave continued forward to engage those who were still loyal to Nightshade. But it was not to be. Just by pumping his gargantuan wings, Nightshade was able to create winds more powerful than those from even the strongest of cyclones. The sheer force that Nightshade could produce was more than enough to send the second wave of dragons crashing to the ground. Nightshade transformed into a man in midair and let himself fall to the ground. Nightshade landed in front of the wave of dragons he had just brought down, breaking his fall with a roll. One of the dragons shifted back into his humanoid form. "You know what I'm going to say, Hellfame," Nightshade stated confidently. "But you can't." "It's not right," Hellfame whimpered. "I say it is, and my word is law," Nightshade replied sternly, and Hellfame lowered his head in shame. "I forgive you," Nightshade smiled, pulling Hellfame into a warm hug. "I will always forgive my people, no matter what you do, no matter how many times you rise up against me." By this time, all of the other dragons had shifted back into their humanoid forms. Nightshade let go of Hellfame and walked over to the other dragons. Nightshade helped up each of his subjects and pulled them each into a hug, one by one. When he was done, Nightshade called all of the Faerun together. "Come, let us celebrate," he cried out. "We have fought among ourselves, and we have returned with a greater unity than before. What better reason is there for celebration?" The Faerun cheered in support of Nightshade's somewhat impulsive decision. The Faerun celebrated long into the night, with some of the best food, drink, and games that could be found. The next morning, as the sun rose, Nightshade could barely make out a pitch-black silhouette on the horizon. As the figure drew closer, Nightshade was able to see it more clearly, and he eventually recognized the form of Voidar. Nightshade snapped his fingers, and a surprisingly comfortable granite chair rose from the ground. The king of the Faerun sat down on his newly fashioned chair and waited for Voidar to reach him. "What do you have to report?" Nightshade wondered curiously, once Voidar was close enough to hear him. "Arathós has learned how to view and manipulate the Wind of Time, sir," Voidar informed worriedly. "I see no harm in that. Arathós is a better man than either Kronos or Kronos," Nightshade shrugged, Anything else? Yes, sir, Voidar confirmed. I have discovered that the darkness has begun to attempt to rise once more. Nightshade sighed. There will be bloodshed, then. Have they been drawn yet? He inquired. They have not yet been drawn, sir, Voidar reported. Soon, I'd imagine. I'll have the Feyran prepare for an invasion. We won't allow any armed forces to enter Earth's atmosphere, Nightshade decided. Of course, sir. Chapter 12. The Spirit of Justice. Impossible, Necroth breathed as Arathós came striding towards him, sword in hand. That world should have broken your spirit. You should have died on Tartarus. I was born on Tartarus, sorcerer, Arathós growled. I broke its spirit, and now I'm back for yours. Weaver, Necroth corrected automatically. Whatever. Weaver, sorcerer, it makes no difference. No difference. I will break you. Arathós and Necroth rushed to meet on the field of battle. Necroth struck first, but Arathós easily parried his strike into the ground. Necroth used the momentum of his staff to throw himself over Arathos's head. Arathós spun to face Necroth and thrust his sword forward as soon as his enemy hit the ground. Necroth caught the tip of Arathos's blade on the body of his staff and pushed the Culverter of Time back. Arathós quickly recovered, kicking between Necroth's hands, snapping the Weaver's staff into two parts. The power that was restrained within the staff broke free and exploded outwards in a flash of white light. The light expanded to encompass the whole battlefield. Necroth's spectral warriors dissipated into a fine mist, and the terrible black glaze that covered the eyes of those who Necroth had enslaved was cleared in naught but a moment. Necroth screamed in anguish, No! I haven't killed enough. It won't find me. Necroth slowly turned back to Arathós. You did this. I will end you. By Necroth's power alone, the two halves of his staff were bathed in his trademark pitch-black fire. Necroth gasped. His fire suddenly flared and turned brown. It's found me. Now you'll feel the true power of death. Necroth spoke quietly and ominously. Arathós raised his sword, readying himself for the fight of his life. Necroth channeled his power into his weapons and directed a thick stream of his brown flames at the Culverter of Time. Arathós responded in kind, using his sword to condense all of his power over the wind of time into a focused beam that sliced through Necroth's flames like a hot knife through butter. The Cathalian stepped calmly to the side, avoiding Arathos's attack by mere inches. Your power has grown. I'm impressed, Necroth noted. Your power remains unchanged, Arathós replied. I grow tired of you. In his annoyance, Arathós allowed a low growl to resonate in the back of his throat. Necroth discarded his weapons in favor of channeling his power through his own hands. The Cathalian flicked his wrist, discharging a ball of fire in Arathos's direction. But the immortal was too fast, simply batting the ball away with the flat of his blade. Necroth narrowed his eyes at his nemesis and continued his bombardment, firing bolt after bolt at Arathós until the former king of Olympus grew tired of the fight and took to the air on his wings of light. Arathós channeled his power again, but this time over darkness. He aimed a steady stream of shadows at Necroth. The Weaver held up his hand, erecting a shield of brown power to defend himself, until Arathós realized that his attempt to overpower Nekroth was futile. Nekroth looked up at Arathós hovering overhead and smiled darkly. "Two can play at that game, Olympian," he mocked. Two great bat-like wings of brown fire sprang out of his back. Nekroth immediately joined Arathós in the sky, seemingly trying to stare the immortal down. By now, all motion but the battle between the two great powers had ceased, and every being on the plane below watched the pair with an overwhelming sense of fear and awe. The men, immortals, Svartalf and Jotuns, watched on as Arathós and Nekroth charged each other high in the sky, Arathós with his own ancient blade, and Nekroth with a staff of solid black flames, held together by his power alone. When the two clashed, an enormous flash of light illuminated the quickly darkening desert sky. The two fought with both their skill and their power until they were encased in a translucent, churning sphere of brown and gold energy. Finally, both Arathós and Nekroth each summoned all of the strength that they could spare and condensed it into impossibly small balls of pure power. Meeting halfway between the enemies, the balls exploded violently, and Arathós and Nekroth were sent spiraling to the ground. Nekroth crashed in a heap in the wreckage of his own smouldering chariot. Arathós caught himself in a cocoon of light and lowered himself to the ground. As the triumphant immortal walked through the ruins towards Nekroth's defeated form, the flames themselves seemed to shy away, afraid to offend what could only be described as a tidal wave of power and devotion. "How?" Nekroth managed to choke out. "Because no matter how powerful you are, or how impossibly brilliant your plan is, you can never for a second hope to overpower the love I have for my family and the determination I have to protect them." "You can't kill me," Nekroth coughed painfully. "Can't I?" Arathós wondered, glaring down at his enemy. "It found me. I'll find her. I'll save the universe. I won't let you get in my way," Nekroth gloated. "What are you talking about?" Arathós never received an answer. Nekroth only laughed, disappearing in a flash of brown light. "Why would you let him go?" Artemis demanded angrily, standing by Arathos's left side. "I didn't," Arathós defended. "I didn't know he could do that. But I'd guess that he'll be out of commission for a while with injuries like that. I think we can count him out if a war breaks out on Olympus." "I suppose that's reasonable," Artemis grudgingly agreed. "In any case, I'm glad you're back," she smiled. 200 years on Tartarus, and all I get is a smile?" Arathós wondered innocently. 200 years? Artemis frowned confusedly. "Yes, why?" Arathós worried. "It's only been 4 years," Artemis revealed. "Time must run faster in... No, you said on, didn't you? Tartarus." Arathós groaned in anguish. 200 years? I feel so old, he complained. "Brother, you've always been old," a voice commented from behind Arathós and Artemis. The pair turned to find Hera smiling warmly at them. "Hera!" Arathós grinned, rushing over to hug his youngest sister. Hera hugged back just as tightly before the two eventually separated. "Arathós, you have to come back to Olympus with us. With you by our side, we'll easily win the war," Hera exclaimed excitedly. "I'm sorry, sister, but I can't. I can't do this anymore. It's war after war after war. Can't we just avoid one?" Arathós replied somberly. "Isn't there some way we can get you to help us?" Artemis implored desperately. "I told you, I can't do this anymore. Even if I came back to Olympus, there's nothing there for me anymore. I wiped all of their memories. Only the two of you, Hestia and my son, even know I exist." Arathós turned and walked away across the desert sands with a hunched back and a broken stride. That was until Hera spoke again. "Asriana remembers you." Arathós stopped in his tracks. "Where is she?" he asked quietly. "With my company," Artemis answered for Hera. "And where is your company?" Arathós implored desperately, turning to face the two immortal women. "When I left them, we were engaged with Necrot's forces in the forests of Arcadia," Artemis recalled. It might not be the best idea to go to her right away. My company might still be..." Arathós was gone before Artemis could finish her sentence. "Recovering," she said to no one in particular. Arathós appeared in Arcadia in a brilliant flash of light. The Culverter of Time flared his aura to signal anyone who might be nearby, and soon enough, a group of young women with their bows drawn had him surrounded in a loose circle. "Took you long enough," Arathós commented dryly as one of the women motioned for the others to lower their bows. "Long enough?" the woman demanded fumingly. "Long enough?" "Asriana, I can explain," Arathós defended. "Explain what?" Asriana demanded. "The fact that you've been gone for nearly 300 years? Is that what you can explain?" "There is a really good... Ow!" Asriana slapped Arathós as hard as she could. "Where have you been?" "For the most part, Tartarus," Arathós managed, still clutching his injured cheek. "Where?" Asriana whispered, terrified for her husband. "Tartarus," Arathós repeated. "I stayed with my father there until he faded. He was a friend of Tartarus's. I couldn't leave until he was gone," he explained carefully, hoping he didn't make Asriana angry again. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Asriana wept, wrapping her arms around Arathós in a tight hug. "You don't need to be sorry," Arathós soothed, readily returning Asriana's gesture. Asriana pulled back slightly, confused by Arathos's comment. "I'm glad you care about me so much that you'd hit me like that," he explained with a smile. "Does that mean I can keep hitting you?" Asriana wondered innocently. Arathós answered her with a soft kiss that she returned happily. "What is this blasphemy?" growled a voice to Arathos's right. The immortal looked up to see the majority of the company of Artemis with their bows drawn and trained on him, and the rest looking similarly angry, albeit curious. "Morena, this isn't what it looks like," Asriana defended. "I've been married to Arathós for thousands of years." "Prove it," another hunter challenged angrily, sending an arrow whizzing just millimeters from Arathos's head. She reached for another from the quiver on her back. "Ara, stand down," a very welcome voice interjected, and the mentioned huntress grudgingly lowered her bow, as did the rest of the company. Arathós looked around at all of the hunters surrounding him and Asriana, counting a few off and muttering a few names. Morena, Ara, Vala, Corne, Rode, Zosime, Amanda, Eulalia, Aspasia, Alexis, Ema, Fulvia, Natalia. Arathós stalled as he looked over each of the hunters carefully. "Where's Adeline?" he asked worriedly. "Girls," Artemis urged importantly, and two of the newer hunters disappeared into the forest, to return only moments later, carrying 2 sticks with ropes stretched out between them. On the stretcher, a dark-skinned woman laid with a gaping hole in her thigh. Arathós tried to rush over to her, but a hunter quickly stood in his way. "Valiant, let him pass," Artemis ordered, though Arathós had already stepped around the huntress faster than she could follow. Kneeling by Adeline's side, Arathos's hands glowed with a bright gold light. The Culverter of Time raised his hands over Adeline's wound and reversed time around the area. He made sure to focus only on the area. If he stretched further, he might have accidentally reversed the mental block that kept her memories of him hidden. Arathós stood up from the ground just as an enormous sheet of lightning flared across the sky. What in the world was that? Arathós wondered confusedly. That was Zeus calling a meeting on Olympus, Artemis replied with a shrug. Why does he have to make it so loud? Couldn't he just do something like this? Arathós snapped his fingers and a silent explosion of golden white sparks lit up the dark night sky. On call, Artemis warned. What? The immortal asked innocently. You know what? Asriana rolled her eyes, far more amused than she was angry. Just don't do it again, Artemis threatened before she disappeared in a flash of silver moonlight. What's got into her? Arathós wondered. Oh, I forgot. You don't know yet, do you? Asriana realized. What don't I know? Arathós implored. Promise me you won't do anything rash. Why would I do something rash? Please, just promise me that you won't, Asriana pleaded. Fine, I promise, Arathós sighed. Zeus sent night to Tartarus, the arena. Tears were prickling the backs of her eyes. Chapter 13. The Tyranny of Ages. Artemis was the first to arrive in the Olympian throne room. Her golden chariot sat disused behind her throne. Next came Apollo, then Hestia, and soon after the majority of the other Olympians, and finally Zeus. The time has come to discuss my magnificent victory over the tyrant Necroth, the king of Olympus proclaimed arrogantly. Artemis shifted uncomfortably in her throne, battling the urge to detach her father's manhood with a well-placed arrow. But first, we must plan how we will rid this world of the dreadful Titans and their leader, the self-absorbed Salvation. This council shall justify no such thing, Hera hissed angrily. Remember your place, woman. Zeus was cut off by a resounding crack that echoed across the broad walls of the throne room. You dare strike your king? Zeus demanded furiously. The king of Olympus was answered with another painful smack. Zeus backhanded Hera across the face, sending her flying to the other side of the throne room, where she collapsed against the wall. Would anyone else challenge my rule? Zeus wondered dangerously. Artemis had finally had enough. This was no time to cower in terror. First, Zeus had tried to kill the only man who had ever been a true father to her. Then he sent her husband to Tartarus. True, it had only been a marriage of convenience, but the nightingale was still her best friend. And now he dared to strike his own wife. The king of Olympus had gone too far. "As I suspected," Zeus said, smirking when nobody had risen to the challenge. "I do," Artemis announced, rising from her throne, her eyes glowing silver in unadulterated rage. "How dare you?" "As do I," Apollo added, rising to stand by his twin. "What is this madness?" "I will not stand by you as you slaughter those who wish you no ill," Hestia stated. Zeus could not fathom it. The most peaceful immortal of all now stood against him. "Anyone else?" Zeus growled fitfully. "Yes," Hephaestus replied, towering above all of the other Olympians with his enormous frame. "Then you will all die this day," Zeus roared, drawing his bolt out of a sheath beside his throne. "Arathós, please help us," was all Artemis could think as her own father readied himself to kill her. Zeus charged his bolt and was about to fire on his daughter when the sky flashed gold and a pillar of white light crashed into the throne room floor, cracking the marble and producing great waves of power that washed over the Olympian council. Zeus cowered in his throne, all his self-proclaimed might discarded in the face of a powerful adversary. The light cleared to reveal Arathós, or Salvation as the Olympians knew him, rising from one knee, his wings shining brighter and his eyes growing darker than they ever had before. "How dare you show yourself in my throne room?" Zeus thundered with unprecedented arrogance and surprising command over his fear. "This is not your throne room, brother. It never was and it never will be," Hestia declared. "I tolerated your tyranny for too long. I will not stand by any longer while you ruin this world." "Are you threatening me?" Zeus demanded. "The king of kings." "You are no king, Zeus. You are a tyrant," Arathós spat disgustedly. "I am the ruler of this entire world, you pathetic mule. It would take only a single minor skirmish for me to rid it of your stench." "It's a war you want, then?" Arathós guessed. "If that's the case, then it is a war you shall receive," he threatened. "Heed my warning, Zeus. I don't want this, but if you attempt to harm my family again, I will tear you to the ground without a second thought. I won't kill you, but I will destroy everything you've worked for throughout your entire immortal life." "I'll just kill you first, then," Zeus sneered, finally regaining enough confidence to rise from his throne once more. "I care not for my own life," Arathós advised. "You would do well to remember that." With his last words lingering, Arathós was whisked away in a swirl of golden light, along with Artemis, Apollo, Hestia, Hera, and Hephaestus. The sky above lost its deep gold hue, and the sounds of the wind and the birds were all that could be heard in the shocked silence of the Olympian throne room. Arathós led Hera, Hestia, Artemis, Apollo, Hephaestus, and Asriana into the great council hall of Rhea's island, where the council themselves sat in wait for his return. The Jotuns, the Asgardians, and the Celts have returned to their respective homelands, he reported as he strode towards his throne. Unfortunately, Zeus and Poseidon are no longer at war with each other. They've singled out a common enemy. Us. Fortunately, thus far, no mortal or immortal army has chosen to fight with them or against them. Nor should they have to, Rhea agreed. It is not their fight. It will be, Kois disagreed. How so? Rhea wondered curiously. Every army refused to join the fight against Nekroth for the first year of the war, as I recall, Kois related. When Nekroth began to threaten the lands they claimed as their own, they dropped their uncaring facades and took up arms. First the Asgardians, then the Celts, then the Persians. I'm sure the Egyptians would have seen sense too if Arathós hadn't returned. Why should it be any different this time? As I recall, you were a mindless slave for the duration of the war, Iapetus scoffed disbelievingly. I was a slave, yes, but I was no less mindless than you are at the present. Though, to be fair, I do often wonder about the existence of such an uncivilized mind as your own, Kois explained. Kois is right, Arathós interjected before a fight could break out between the two brothers. However, I do believe that a level of diplomacy will be required, rather than a significant overabundance of hope. No offense, he added quickly, glancing at Hestia. None taken, brother, Hestia smiled. In any case, we cannot allow the Olympians to gain allies amongst the world's immortals, Arathós acknowledged. The Olympians plan to commit mass genocide of the human race, and of any others that would stand against their regime, including and especially us. If they gain too many allies, we may not be able to stop them. Then why do we debate? Hephaestus grunted with some disinterest. The Olympians don't need to recover from the war as we do. If I know Zeus, he's already sent Hermes to garner the favor of the more powerful of the world's immortal councils. The troll is correct. We should release emissaries at once, Iapetus agreed begrudgingly. The troll? Hephaestus exclaimed angrily. I'll have you known that among men I am considered to be one of the most handsome. That may be, but among immortals you are positively mundane. Please, ladies, Apollo sighed exasperatedly. Why don't you just do us all a favor and build a bridge so you can hide under it and scare some small children? Thank you, grandson, Rhea smiled amusedly as Hephaestus and Iapetus continued to glare daggers at each other. Arathós has the most experience in dealing with other immortal councils, if my memory serves me correctly, Oceanus noted. I find that it would be logical for him to deduce who would be the best suited to gain the allegiance of each of them. I agree, Rhea nodded. Arathós? The culvertor of time straightened in his throne, regaining his regal aura before he began to call out his orders. The Asgardians and the Vaena value wisdom, so I'd say Kois would be a good ambassador. Find Lelantos and bring him along too. He and Loki get along quite well. I think the Light Elves would be most reasonable to someone who can always remain civil. Mnemosyne, if you feel up to it, you would be the best choice to be our representative, but if you don't want to, I understand. I will do as you say, Arathós, Mnemosyne smiled. Mother, if you could go with her, we will hold council with both the Dark and Light Elves, Rhea reassured her son. Thank you. Now the dwarves. I've got them covered. Perseus can come too if he wants, Hephaestus stated, secretly eager to meet some of the best forgers the world had ever seen. Thank you, nephew. The dwarves' expertise will be extremely useful, Arathós approved. Oceanus and Tethys? Jotuns, got it. You know me well, Arathós beamed before he turned his attention back to the matter at hand. Iapetus. Go to hell. With pleasure, sir, Iapetus grinned. The Celtic sorcerers? Stargazing tree huggers. Artemis, Kraios, have fun. I am not a tree hugger, Artemis exclaimed indignantly. No, you're a tree kisser, Apollo piped up. Apollo, you and Helios can have the Egyptians and the Persians. Just don't make a fool of yourself in front of Ahura Mazda. But I like making a fool of myself, Apollo pouted sarcastically. Now let's see. Phoebe, you have the most experience with the Chinese dragons, yes? That I do, the Othresian of wise counsel replied softly. Selene and I will meet with them together. The Aztecs, the Mayans, and the Incans are due to have their annual council in a few weeks. I believe Hera and Hestia should attend the event together, seeing as they're the most level-headed among us. We will not fail you, brother, Hera stated confidently. Azriana and I will meet with Hades, Persephone, and any other Greek immortals who are not welcome on Olympus, though I have a private errand to run beforehand. I think we should get Asteria and her daughter to meet with the magicians of Japan and Antarctica, Hyperion suggested. Oh, yes, I forgot about them. Good idea. You can get the message to them? Of course. If that's it then, Arathós decided, just remember, if your hosts are hostile, don't engage them. Just get out as quickly as you can. Oh, Themis, Thea, Hyperion. I'm sorry, but there's nobody else. You'll need to defend the humans, and maybe recruit a few of them. Yes, sir, the three nodded, accepting their grim assignment. Meeting adjourned, Arathós declared, leaving the council room in a flash of golden light. Soon enough, the council was empty, each of the immortals having gone their separate ways.